I hunt cryptids just like Sam and Dean Winchester. At least, that's what I tell myself when the darkness closes in and my heartbeat thunders in my ears. The job isn't glamorous, and it sure as hell isn't something you share with friends over coffee. It's lonely work, the kind that festers in the shadows of your mind until it takes root and becomes a part of you. It all started with the Wendigo in the northern forests of Minnesota. I was only 17, naive, armed with nothing but a hunting knife and stories my grandfather whispered when he thought I was asleep. My grandfather, a fierce man with storm-gray eyes, always spoke of creatures that thrived where the cold bites the skin and the silence is heavy enough to suffocate you. "This ain't some campfire story, boy," he'd rasp, cigarette smoke curling around his words. "Out there, in the dead of night, the forest breathes, and sometimes it whispers back." That first encounter was a baptism by terror. I had followed the scratching sounds deep into the woods, where the trees loomed like skeletal sentinels. The snow crunched beneath my boots, muffling the erratic thudding of my heart. A chill wrapped itself around my spine as I stumbled upon a clearing, and there, crouched in the half-light of the crescent moon, was the Wendigo. Its gaunt frame was impossibly tall, limbs spindly and jointed at unnatural angles. Hollow eyes glowed with a feverish hunger, and when it turned its head, I saw rows of needle-thin teeth gleaming like icicles. I don't remember screaming, but the rawness in my throat after proved that I had. My fingers went numb, whether from the cold or sheer terror, I couldn't tell. All I knew was that if I didn't move, I'd be just another story in a forgotten newspaper. The battle was as savage as it was brief. My grandfather's tales never mentioned how quick they were, how their claws whistled through the air faster than the human I could track. I felt one swipe slice through my jacket, warm blood trickling down my arm, even as the cold stole the sensation away. But fear has a way of turning cowards into fighters. I jabbed blindly, steel meeting frozen flesh, and a shriek like shattering glass erupted from its maw. It recoiled just enough for me to stagger back into the safety of the trees, the shadows swallowing me whole as I ran until my legs gave out. That was the night I learned two things. One, the old legends were true, and two, I was going to make this my life. Years passed, and the hunts only got stranger. I moved from town to town, tracking creatures most people dismiss as fiction. Mothman in West Virginia, a wailing banshee in the Emerald Hills of Ireland, even an encounter with a skinwalker in the parched deserts of Arizona that left me with a scar curling around my ribcage like a serpent. Each hunt came with its own lore, its own scent of fear, but they all shared one thing: the hollow, knowing gaze of something that recognizes you as prey. I should have stopped after the skinwalker. The way it mimicked my own voice, pleading and sobbing in the dark, still haunts my dreams. But obsession is a potent drug. It's not just the thrill of the hunt. It's the need to understand why these creatures exist, why they show themselves to only a few, and what that says about the darkness within us all. This brings me to my latest hunt, one that changed everything. The call came in late, the static-laced voice of an old contact who owed me more than a few favors. "There's something in the Appalachians," he whispered, each word heavy with dread. "People are vanishing. It's not like anything I've seen before." I drove for hours, the mountains looming larger as the sun dipped behind them, swallowing the world in shadow. The small town nestled at the base of the range was eerily quiet, its streets empty as if holding their breath. Locals wouldn't talk, but their eyes said enough. Whatever was out there, they feared it more than death. The first night in the forest was uneventful, almost peaceful if not for the creeping feeling that I was being watched. It was on the second night that I heard a low, guttural growl that reverberated through my bones. I turned, flashlight slicing through the dark, only to catch a glimpse of something shifting between the trees. It was fast, too fast, but the silhouette was wrong, as if it wore the shape of a man but didn't quite fit inside the skin. Then came the whispers, soft and familiar, the voice of my mother who'd been dead for years. "Come home, sweetheart." The words slithered into my ears, coaxing, promising warmth and safety. But I knew better. I raised my gun, silver bullets loaded and heart pounding like a war drum. The thing stepped into the light, eyes black as oil and mouth curving into an almost human smile. It wasn't until it lunged that I realized what I was dealing with: a mimic, a creature that takes the form of what you fear and love the most. The fight was brutal, a tangle of claws, teeth, and blinding pain. But as the first rays of dawn split the sky, I stood victorious, my breath ragged and blood soaking the ground beneath me. The mimic lay crumpled at my feet, its form flickering between a shadowy beast and the hollow-eyed reflection of myself. As I limped back to my truck, the adrenaline fading and reality sinking in, one thought echoed louder than the rest. I hunt cryptids, but maybe I'm the one being hunted. My name is Jonathan, and I've been a ranger for 12 years now. I've always loved working in the forest. It's very quiet, peaceful, and feels like the only career path where you can truly be one with nature. However, I've experienced some paranormal things here and there, ranging from unexplained to downright terrifying. I'll start this story off with what happened. I won't mention the name of the town, but I'll say that it's very old, and the only people living there are those who either used to reside there or people who enjoy living away from civilization completely. The majority of its population is elderly, so when we get a call in the middle of the night, it usually means that someone has passed away. This time was different though, because it wasn't an elderly person who died. It was two hikers, two college students to be exact. They were trekking through the woods when they stumbled upon a large tree that had fallen over them, but was wedged between several other trees. Even though we recorded it as the tree falling on them, I'm going to tell you what really happened. The witness I interviewed said she had watched them go up about 10 feet before turning around to head back to town. Suddenly, she sees this massive canine leap out of nowhere, attacking both of them. It dragged one of the girls off, but ripped the other girl right in half, spilling out her innards on the tree below. When my partner and I went out there together, we found their bodies less than 100 feet away from each other, which is why we had to document it as a tree falling on them. It just makes the paperwork easier. No trace of this creature or canine was ever found, and their bodies and faces were so mangled that recognition was nearly impossible. We had to use dental records to identify them. This incident was also very close to town and in view of much of the community, which is why we had several witnesses. Personally, I have no idea what could have done this or why it happened, but I know one thing for sure. Seeing a young woman like that ripped apart by something like, I don't know, a werewolf really does a number on you. Anyway, I hope this story was enough to convince you that the woods aren't always exactly safe. Take it from a guy like me who works in this job field. I see and experience a lot more than we're allowed to talk about. At the beginning of September 2014, my husband and I, along with our 26-year-old son and his pit bull, were camping in the Laurentian Mountains in Quebec at a campground called Camping Lausanne. It is close to a national park. I knew there were a few reports of Bigfoot sightings in the national park nearby. We had been camping in our 32-foot Winnebago there for 2 days and everything was going well. It was a weekday and there weren't many other campers on the grounds. Before bed around midnight, my husband had to use the bathroom, and instead of using the camper bathroom, he went to the public bathroom. He was gone for at least half an hour to 45 minutes. I started to worry about him, but I didn't go looking for him. It was quite dark. I asked him not to wander around at that hour in the dark of the countryside. He had stopped to smoke a cigarette outside the campsite washroom, then slowly made his way back to the camper. He got back at about 12:30 a.m. At about 1 a.m., everyone was sleeping, and I was in bed reading. Out of nowhere, there was a loud thump on the side of the camper. The thump was very loud, and it hit right beside the window on my side of the bed. The camper rocked like it was pushed. It rocked 3 times and stopped. It scared the hell out of me. No one woke up, and the dog didn't bark. I quickly woke my husband and whispered to him what had happened. My heart was pounding from fear. He's a hard sleeper, so he said he didn't feel a thing. The window is about 8 feet above the ground. Whatever hit the side was tall and strong enough to rock the whole camper. I turned out the light so I could see outside. Slipping the curtain aside carefully, I looked out the window and saw nothing. My husband said it was probably the wind, but there was no wind at all and it was quiet. It was completely dead air. He then said it was probably a raccoon. If it were a raccoon, I'd have heard it rustling around and Hal would have reached up beside the window to bang on the outside wall. I'm not stupid and have camped my whole life, coming across many raccoons in my time, as well as deer and fox, and once even a bear. My husband went back to sleep after checking things and looking outside the door and the windows. There was nothing there, and he admitted there was no wind at all, and it was dead still air that night. Approximately 20 minutes later, there was another hard, loud punch or bang on the Winnebago outside wall, again in the same area about 8 to 9 feet off the ground. And it actually rocked the camper, and my husband sat up in shock, and it kept rocking the camper, probably about 10 times. My husband asked, "Why is it not stopping?" And then it stopped. I don't think I've ever seen my husband scared like he was that night. He wouldn't even open the camper door to inspect outside, and he closed off all of the lights. He admitted that it wasn't the wind. Then he said it could have been a raccoon. But how could it reach the window, and why would it bang on the camper like that? We talked and rationalized for a while. After another hour of waiting to see if it would happen again, we went to sleep. We couldn't figure out why there were no sounds of hooves, if it were a deer breaths and snorts from a bear, or rustling from a raccoon foraging around for food. It was dead silent, no footstep sounds, no rustling grass or leaves, no foraging noises, nothing. Then we thought, why didn't the dog bark? I kept listening and listening because we had the window open since it was pretty hot out. But we decided to close them in case it was dangerous. We thought it could have been people trying to scare us, prank us, or rob us, so we locked everything and closed the windows and blinds. We didn't have any more occurrences that night. We stayed for 2 more nights. Nothing like this had happened again, it was just that one night. The next morning we were telling our son, and I texted my brother, who is an avid Bigfoot researcher. He had contacted you, Lon. You gave him advice to give to us, which was basically to leave the campsite because all of these were classic signs of a possible Bigfoot encounter. We didn't leave, but the next morning I tried to reach the spot outside the Winnebago where it was banging and being rocked. I'm 5'4" and I could not reach that height even on my tippy toes and with my arms outreached. So it was about 8 or 9 feet high. Then I tried to rock the camper the way it was being rocked, and I realized I couldn't even budge it. So I asked my husband to give it a try. He couldn't do it either, it wouldn't budge. Whatever rocked the camper was very strong. Strong enough that while I was in bed my body was swaying back and forth like I was in a boat on wavy waters. So I think that cancels out the possibility of it being another camper playing a trick or a raccoon. Still, if it were a deer, we'd have heard it trampling around a little, and a bear makes noise too. It was so quiet. Eerily quiet. When we discussed it again, the following afternoon my husband admitted that it was unusual, and it certainly wasn't the wind. I think that since he went to the bathroom so late at night, he could have been spotted by a Bigfoot and followed back to the campsite. It shook the camper to get us to come out and possibly abduct or harm us. We were both pretty shook up. We won't camp there again. I wanted to write to you earlier, but of course fear of being judged and not believed. We didn't tell anyone and left the campground feeling like we experienced something unusual and fearful, yet there wasn't much we could do about it. There were no tracks and nothing was out of place the next morning. Even though we had left things, like dishes and our lantern, an ashtray on our campsite picnic table, and nothing was disturbed. So me and a group of 3 other friends went camping the summer after we graduated from high school. We ended up going to this place that is next to a government-enclosed cliff dwelling that literally took over an hour off of a normal trail to get to. This was awesome for me since I am into ancient stuff like that. So we went under the fence to explore this cliff dwelling and found a ton of interesting things: broken pottery, arrowheads, bones, etc., and everything was fine. We started a fire around nightfall and were cooking hot dogs when my friend that showed us this place started saying he feels uneasy, like someone or something is watching us. I couldn't tell if we was messing around with us or not, but my other friend Brandon, coming back from a piss, stated he saw a mountain lion, and that could be what my other friend is referring to. The night continues, and we are just bullshitting with each other. My friend still feels uneasy, and that is when we see glowing eyes of what we believe is a mountain lion, maybe 30-40 feet in front of us. This startled me, as glowing eyes in the darkness is creepy as hell. As the night went on, we began seeing more glowing eyes out in the darkness. We all started feeling uneasy, so put more wood in our fire and decided to call it a night. 2 of my friends slept in the car, and my uneasy friend and I slept in his tent. We eventually went to sleep, but I was awoken in the middle of the night around 3 a.m. I was woken up due to the sound of footsteps and whispering outside our tent. I was shitting bricks at this point and was too scared to investigate. The whispering and footsteps eventually turned into what sounded like multiple people running around outside and heavy breathing, like if a group of people were just sprinting and hopping around our campsite. This was easily noticeable and quite loud, but my friend in the tent with me was still asleep. I woke him up to what was going on outside, as I did not want to experience this alone, and we were both freaking out and too scared to really do anything about it. The sprinting and heavy breathing disappeared, as if that group of people started running away. It was completely silent at this point, and after what was probably 15 seconds of silence, bright lights started flashing upon our tent from everywhere. I say everywhere because they were literally on all sides and coming from above us like something was flashing us from the sky. This probably happened for about 15 seconds and stopped. Nothing else happened the rest of the night, when the sun started coming up. We got out of our tent, and there was no footprints besides ours going into the tent around where we were hearing everything. We spoke with the two other friends that were in the Jeep, and they stated they heard no noises or saw any lights throughout the night. I am sorry for the long post, as I probably could have made it a lot shorter. I still am not sure what happened or if my two other friends were just messing with us, but they state that they did nothing like that to this day. Does anyone have any explanation as to what the hell happened to my friend and I that night? I once found a big pile of fresh doo-doo in the middle of a trail. Looked around and saw a figure about 15 yards away in the bushes. Once they noticed I noticed them, it bolted full speed at me. I turned around so quick and ran the way I came from to my car. Once I got in my car and locked the doors, the figure, which happened to be a deranged man, was running out of the entrance, still locked onto me. He jumped on my hood and smeared shit on my windshield. I put it on reverse and burned out from there, making him fly off my hood. Once I got some distance and time to reflect what the F just happened, I called the sheriff. They found him and said I stumbled upon a felon on PCP who robbed a few houses in the city, and they've been on the hunt for him for a few weeks. Seeing things as I wake up. I wanted to share this, although I'm not sure if this is a paranormal experience, but it's something that's never happened to me in my 27 years of life, and I would love to hear thoughts or even similar stories. So to preface, me and my boyfriend live in a house where two previous owners have unfortunately passed away in. The second being his dad. We moved in after his passing to keep the house in the family. I've had small stuff happen from time to time in the 2 years we've lived here. Like the first 2 months we lived here, it was freezing all the time in the house, and I usually run warm and don't get too cold easily. I thought I saw my lampshade move on its own. A light I swear I turned off is on again later. About 6 months ago, I remember waking up in the middle of the night to turn over and face my boyfriend. I wrap my arm around him and open my eyes, and I see what looks exactly like his father standing over my boyfriend's side of the bed. I couldn't see features, but as if a man was truly above our bed with his father's hair and his father's height and build. It took everything in me not to scream, and I'm surprised I didn't wake my boyfriend up with how bad I jolted and gasped. My eyes adjusted and realized I was looking at a poster we have on our wall of some big dragon animal. I shook it off, but truly never knew if what I saw was real, and it never happened again. But last week I was facing the other way and woke up to what I thought was a scary little girl who looked like a doll with button eyes, but in a heartbeat shifted back into my dresser. That one woke my boyfriend up since I screamed and jumped over to him. I want to understand why this is happening, so again, I'd love thoughts. Thank you. A little background on where I am before I jump into the encounter. I'm stationed in Arizona, living on base in the dorms. The rooms are a bit small. I live in a 10 by 10 room with a door leading into the shared kitchen and bathroom with my roommate. This joining door is very heavy and makes an audible SHH sound when closed. On the door, there's a deadbolt on my side to keep my roommate out. Obviously, when the deadbolt is turned, it clicks into and out of place very loudly, and in a 10 by 10 room, the sound is obnoxiously loud. At the time of this occurrence, my roommate had been gone for 2 weeks for training, so nobody was in the room with me. Another side note, everybody keeps their adjoining door locked 24/7 because who wants someone busting in on their room? I'm definitely one of those who keeps the deadbolt in place, unless I'm actively in the kitchen or using the bathroom. The deadbolt only locks from my side of the door, keep this in mind. I fell asleep around 8 a.m. on Saturday after staying awake all night, and I had a dream. It was movie night in my dad's room for our family, so both my brothers had little inflatable mattresses on the floor on the far side of my dad's bedroom, on the side of his bed furthest from the door. Nothing really weird about the movie. We watched it, and then it was time for bed. My brothers were passed out on the mattress asleep, and my stepmom was asleep holding my dad. I was leaning up against my dad's bed, back facing the doorway, with one leg on the ground and one leg leaned on the mattress, kind of folded in at my stomach. For some reason, my dad and I were just talking about something random, keeping our tones hushed so we wouldn't wake the rest of the family, when we both completely froze mid-sentence. We heard someone wheezing. Don't ask me why, but for some reason, we both knew it wasn't either one of my brothers. It was coming from beneath the bed. We were frozen, eyes locked on each other, listening to this rasping for what felt like minutes. Finally, I was able to move, realizing too late that my leg was asleep. I fell off the bed because of this, and I landed on the ground with a thud, smacking my head on the hardwood. The wheezing continued, louder now. I can't really explain what the wheezing sounded like. It was definitely lacking rhythm and sounded literally like someone was forcing their breathing. I opened my eyes and realized I was searching the darkness under the bed crazily for some shadow or movement. As soon as my eyes locked onto a body, I started screaming, "Go away, go away, go away," maybe 10 to 20 times. I realized I couldn't move again. My eyes were locked only on a shadowy figure, unmoving. After I finished repeating my screams at the shadow, I felt a sudden release. The wheezing had stopped, and I could finally move again, but I felt super heavy, like my body was absolutely exhausted. I stood up as fast as I could and launched myself onto the bed with my father. My dad's eyes were very big, and the white stood out to me in the darkness of the room. For some reason, it made my fear rise further into my throat. We lay there, clutching each other, literally frozen with fear, like that fear you get that makes you breathe immensely quietly. I strained against the darkness in search of something, primal fear. If I move, I die. We sat like that for minutes, but it felt like hours. We were starting to feel a bit relaxed as we hadn't heard the rasping breath for a while, when something very tall and very emaciated stood from the other side of the bed I'd fallen out of. It was so dark in the room, I could only make out a shadow, so I couldn't see any coloration or definite details, just a very shadowy, tall figure. I could only make out the face, really. I wish I could draw, so maybe you guys could see what it looked like. My dad and I didn't breathe at all. We waited for it to move, but it just stood there, 2 feet away. I assumed it was watching us. The wheezing had begun again. After what felt like literally hours of watching this creature, just listening to the strange wheezing and staring at it, it started to loom over the bed. A long hand reached out towards me. The thing had spindly fingers, no claws, but like weird, bony fingertips, very skinny wrists, and joints on the hand. I woke up as the creature touched me. My body was extremely heavy now. I felt absolutely drained, and my eyelids were heavy from exhaustion. I picked up my phone to look around in the darkness of my room, and saw that somehow I had managed to sleep until Sunday at 3:33 a.m. I know what this means, as I've grown up watching all the typical scary horror movies and reading the scary stories, etc. I started to feel that thick fear rise in my throat again. My eyes welled with tears, and I was ready to turn my phone flashlight on to scan the room thoroughly when I heard my connecting door to the kitchen had closed and locked. I felt myself stiffen from fear and widen my eyes in the darkness, trying to see what could have closed my door. Now, these doors are very heavy, like I said before, and have a distinct sound when closed. The deadbolt is heavy metal and makes a loud noise when moved, kind of like a metal pane. I couldn't see anything in the darkness and had to literally hold my eyelids open because I was feeling so weighed down. After turning on my flashlight and seeing nothing, I got up and turned all the lights on. I'm too scared to go back to sleep now. The shadows being cast in my room seem to move when I look away from them, so I've turned on all the lights. It's now Tuesday, and I have not slept since. My skin is crawling from the feeling of being stared at, as if any form of lights are turned off, I will be doomed. I woke in a sweat puddle, feeling as though I had been through hell, and I just literally have tears streaming down my face typing this. But I need to get this down, so maybe I can get some answers. I have attached what is a drawing of what I've seen. When I was 14, I took my dog outside and experienced the strangest feeling. The house next door was almost finished being built, with only the glass doors added. One was slightly ajar. I remember hearing some noise, and my boyfriend at the time wasn't scared. He assured me that someone was just inside. I looked up and saw someone waving their right hand, almost as if saying hello. I never saw him again, but now I'm 17, and my current boyfriend and I were outside smoking. Keep in mind, this house was built right in front of the back of my house, but slightly to the left, so from where I was sitting, I couldn't see that house anymore, plus people were living in it by then. My current boyfriend glanced toward the corner of my fence, got scared, and asked if I saw that. I asked him what he saw, and he told me he saw a figure with a hat and a briefcase waving. I asked if it was with his right hand and showed him the motion I saw years ago. It was exactly the same. What could this mean? Could it be him? A warning or sign, maybe? He was closer this time, but hasn't gone past the fence. I don't think he's able to. As command duty officer for the NAVMAG in Guam, this was a bit of a weird occurrence among many around 2014. In training for the position, and I'm following my first class around the compound locking down the buildings. We first started with the chief's building by closing the op areas and head inside to arm the remote security. We both hear this weird TSSHHH noise, and when we get to one of the offices we find the TV is on and scrolling upward in the channel numbers. Whatever, turn it off and continue locking up. Command duty officer in question realizes he left the command duty officer bag in the chief's building, so we head back to retrieve it. Open the door, dearm the system, and that familiar noise of the TV being on greets us again. Go into the same office, and it is now scrolling down in channels. We pull the plug, but the TV remains on and continues scrolling. Call up the watch officer and tell him what's happening, and let him know we are heading back without completely locking the buildings. Watch officer was less than happy, but we armed the last building quickly and left the area in a hurry. Growing up in my old place, I always felt a presence in and around the bathroom. Anywhere else in the house felt fine majority of the time. As a 4 or 5-year-old, I was frequently spooked during the night and got into my parents' bed, for reasons I'm still unclear about. Whenever I'd be laying in my parents' bed, laying there awake, trying to calm down, get comfy, go to sleep, etc., I'd always start watching a cluster of floating orbs gradually appear out of thin air. Shaped stars, swirls, squares, triangles would float in and out of a space, sorta like a galaxy screensaver on a big screen, but without being able to see the device projecting it, so to speak. Lil me would drift off to sleep, never actually seeing it dissipate or travel anywhere, because I'd be asleep before that happened. Another time at my grandparents' house, around that same age of 4 or 5, spending the night with my 2 older brothers because dad traveled for work and mom did night shifts in a casino safe. I was walking down the hallway to go into the lounge room when I've looked into the smaller spare room. We slept in a larger spare bedroom because that one became storage and seemed like, 15-20 shadow figures dancing on all 4 corners of the room, like tribal ritual type dancing. Never seen it again since. Back at old home, we got the bathroom renovated back in 2019 because needed the upgrade. I was 25 years old. One day during construction, the tradesmen had gone on their lunch break. 2 had gone to get McDonald's while the others sat outside and ate, had a cigarette, etc. I was using my sewing machine, working on a project when I felt the need to look up toward the direction of the bathroom. I seen a 7 feet tall shadow figure staring at me. When he realized I clocked him, he casually bent his tall ass through the doorway and back into the bathroom. Knowing it was just me in the house for the next 40-ish minutes, I got up and walked into the bathroom. Surely enough, no one was in there, and I could see the tradies smoking out by their cars, chatting away. I thought for a second it could have been the main plumber we hired for the job because he's 6 foot something, but not quite tall enough to need to bend through a doorway. I also didn't hear anyone come inside because the front door was slightly noisy and the heavy steps of steel cap boots would have made that apparent, but there was no noise. For me, it was a spectral dog that hangs around the road that I lived on a few years ago. It's well known to the locals as haunting that end of the road, and there are two types of encounters. Either it appears as a warning of an impending accident and has often prevented a few, or it shows up after the accident has occurred. Typically described as a large shaggy white dog with glowing red eyes, seen at a distance in the nearby farmers' fields. It wasn't so far away from me. Wife and I were driving home from a long day trip into DC, and we were both knackered. We were trying our best to keep each other awake. Her talking to keep my mind going, and I talking to her to keep her awake so she could keep me awake. We had turned onto the road and had a mile and a half to go before we were home when my wife screamed, "Look out!" just as I saw something canid, white, large and shaggy run in front of the car. I slammed on the brakes and swerved, but it was too close, and we were moving too fast to avoid it. I pulled over to look for the dog that I had to have hit and found nothing. No blood, no fur, no injured dog, no damage to the bumper. Nothing. We gave up looking and drive home. The adrenaline surge kept us going until we got home, and for an hour past that before we were ready to finally go to bed. Told a coworker about the encounter, and that's when she told me about the spectral dog, and that I likely ran into that. My husband and I were hiking to a small lake off of a logging road in Colorado. It was a very short out and back, about 4 miles total, and we were the only car in the small dirt lot at the trailhead. The trail followed an old mining road and had a steep incline on one side and a granite ridge on the other. We both felt very off, but foolishly kept on hiking, eager to see a remote lake. At one point my husband saw a shovel leaning against a tree on the granite ridge, but chose not to tell me. Before the lake, the trail narrowed and led us through a thicket with a lake on the other side. Right before the thicket, we stopped in shock. The dirt trail was completely torn up, and there were man-dug holes. They were large holes, and about 1-2 feet deep. We should have turned around immediately, but again wanted to see the lake on the other side of the thicket. So we walked around the holes, got to the lake, and paused to take a few pictures. We weren't going to bother relaxing at the lake because we were both very unsettled by the holes. As we turned to leave and head back through the thicket, we both stopped and looked at each other. The look we exchanged confirmed we both smelled it cinnamon gum strong enough that the person chewing it had to be close. There was a little wind, and turning around after the lake must have blown the smell our way. We silently walked back through the thicket and back over the holes in the trail that now seemed much more ominous. The hike back was a terrifying 2 miles. My husband, 6'3", pulled out his foraging knife, and I did too. I also pulled out my bear spray. I keep it around for people more than bears when hiking alone. We both assumed our tires would be slashed when we got back to the parking lot, but thankfully they were not. Once we were safely away from the trailhead, my husband told me that he thought he saw someone tracking us from the granite ridge line on our way back. The lesson: if it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't, and you should leave. Hiking in the Umpqua forest with my boyfriend and dog about 3 years ago. The road we lived off of ended in logging roads, like most in southern Oregon. We found a cool trailhead with a parking lot and thought we should check it out. About a mile into the hike, the trail crossed a stream. Louie, our dog, ran ahead of us and then came bolting back past us. This freaked both of us out really badly because we've seen him run up on mountain lions and big bears. He is a big boy and grew up in Humboldt with literally no fear of animals. He's charged a wild horse in Mexico. He was shaking like panic attack with his tail between his legs. He wouldn't go back over the creek and was insisting we go back to the car. Every once in a while on the trail, he would turn around and look behind us and wait until we had walked past him. If it scared him that bad, I never want to know what it was. We were in a national forest dispersed camping, but using a spot off the road that clearly many had camped at. Our truck was visible from the road, but the campsite was down a little trail and not visible from the road. We happened to be putting dinner equipment or food back in the truck at the end of the night after dark when a truck approached on the road and stopped about 50 yards away. It sounded like two guys having an argument until we realized they were yelling at us, obscenities, etc. We figured let's close up the truck and go back into our sight so they couldn't see us and keep quiet. They turned off their headlights and slow rolled by our sight and stopped, and then told us they were going to kill us and would come back for us in the middle of the night, etc. Then they shot a gun, presumably straight up in the air, but we couldn't see, and peeled out. Freaked us the HLL out. Probably just a couple local drunks entertaining themselves, but why they were on that road, a random Forest Service road in a national forest at that time, and decided to do that, I have no idea. We thought about packing up and leaving, but figured there was no chance they'd come back. Wandering into someone else's campsite in the middle of the night, when you don't know how many people are there or what they're like, is a recipe for disaster. We didn't think they'd try that. We were unarmed, but they didn't know that. Fortunately, it was 4 men, but I think if it had been my wife and I, we might have left. Before I get the kind of lecture I'd expect from my father, I know that it's a risky move to walk home alone at night. I know, especially as a young woman, that it's unsafe, that anything could happen. Okay, I know. That being said, I come from a remarkably safe area. The kind of place where people don't shoot up in bed worried because they can't remember if they locked their doors. I've stumbled home drunk more than a few times myself, only to discover my keys long forgotten in the lock outside the next morning. Nobody really worried because nothing bad really happened here, not until a few months ago. Up until now, it wasn't actually considered that dangerous to walk alone after dark here. I did it pretty often myself. I don't have a car, and the public transportation system here is basically non-existent. I'm saving up to finally get myself a vehicle, but it's a bit of a vicious cycle. I can't afford a car, and the relative safety it would afford me so to get one, I have to work. And I'm a bartender, so that means working late shifts. There's been a recent spate of killings in my town, the first of its kind, really. We've seen a startling number of victims who've all met their end at the hands of a frenzied knife attacker over the past few months. And the murders are all brutal beyond belief. The victims are stabbed to the point of death, and then some, past the point of recognition. Complete overkill. First it was one murder every so often, but now sometimes multiple victims are found after a single night. All of these people were simply going about their business as usual, walking home after dark from work or a friend's place or the store. Many of them died just yards from the safety and comfort of their homes, some mere steps away from their front doors. We've been forced to confront the fact that we almost certainly have a serial killer on our hands. With all of this weighing heavy on my mind, I guess you'll all understand why I was terrified to find myself out on the street hours past nightfall and out of options. Surprisingly, I wasn't leaving a shift last night that I can plan for, and I actually have started carpooling with my coworkers over the past couple weeks. After realizing I was either out or working a startling amount of the nights when the killer added another victim to his count, I figured I needed to take these extra measures to ensure my safety. I was actually leaving my boyfriend's, ex-boyfriend's house late last night after we got into a huge fight. It started with the same old stuff. He's incredibly jealous, aggressively possessive. Despite my being faithful for the several years we've been together, he's never learned to trust me. He's always going on and on about my phone, insisting that if I don't respond to him, then I must be cheating. He was drunk, belligerent, and he wouldn't let it go last night. He pointed out several recent windows of time when I should have texted back, failing to realize that because these instances were in the middle of the night, I was either working or sleeping like any other normal person. The fight started at around 2 a.m. and ended over an hour later. He seriously broke my phone, then kicked me out with no way to call for help. I had no cash on hand and no way to call a cab anyway. The buses had stopped running for the night, and the walk to the nearest bus stop probably would have been longer than the walk back home. I was drunk and alone and scared and helpless. I briefly considered knocking on a neighbor's door, but stopped myself. I didn't want to make a fuss. I could just walk home on my own, it wasn't a big deal. It'd only take me about 15 minutes. After all, I'd done it plenty of times before. With a renewed or feigned, more likely sense of courage, I plodded down the steps outside my ex's house and onto the sidewalk. I tried desperately not to think of the serial attacker, but it was no use. I couldn't silence my thoughts about what scared me most about the maniac, his preferred victims. It was his lack of preference that worried me most, actually. It sounds horrible to say, but in that moment, I couldn't deny the thought if he only went for a certain kind of victim, like petite blonde girls, I'd have felt safer. As I continued my walk, I thought back on all of his victims, realizing that there was no common thread that could stitch his choice of victims together. There was no neat box that I could categorize them in, all in the name of making myself feel safer. Even more horrifying still, several men had fallen victim to the killer big men that sure as hell put up a fight, yet stood no chance against such vicious knife attacks. Chillingly, such a variety in victims communicated one thing to me, and as I turned down the next street about halfway through my walk, then the message was suddenly loud and clear. His motives to kill didn't come from the normal things I'd expect. He didn't hate his mom, he wasn't angry at his first girlfriend for leaving him. He wasn't killing a specific type of victim to live out his fantasies of vengeance against those he'd felt had wronged him. He killed for one reason and one reason alone. He loved to do it. With this realization, I found myself walking at a brisk pace, much quicker than usual. Before the onslaught of brutal killings, I used to enjoy my walks home, used to savor the quiet of the town after dark. It used to feel like the world belonged to me, like everything had slowed down for my enjoyment alone, like I was the only person left on the planet. Last night, it was different, a slight difference, but one that made a monumental impact. In my mind, I wasn't the only person anymore. Instead, it was just me and the knife-wielding fiend, hellbent on my destruction. Just the hunter and its prey. I tried to silence these thoughts, tried in vain to reassure myself that we hadn't seen an attack in a little over 2 weeks. For a few moments, these internal reassurances actually worked. Perhaps it was the buzz I still had going. I felt myself start to calm, though I remained vigilant. I had to be. My senses were on high alert so that I wouldn't get caught off guard. It was probably because of this heightened vigilance that I heard the sound from behind me, the first sign to prove that I was as far from alone as I feared. Before I'd even registered the disturbance, my head whipped around instinctively to look back over my shoulder. It was hard to see at first, but once I saw a quiver of movement in the distance, my stomach bottomed out and hit the ground. There was a man behind me, dressed head to toe in black. He was walking quite quickly, himself with purpose, and I wasn't about to stick around and find out what exactly his purpose was. I felt frozen in place for a moment, but once my body caught up with me, we were on our way further down the street. I was only a couple blocks away from my house at that point, and my feet carried me as fast as they could, but my shoes were uncomfortable and I found it hard to move. I could still hear him shuffling along behind me, his footfalls coming at a disturbingly fast pace. From the sounds alone, I figured I'd hardly expanded the gap between us. He was in quick pursuit. I wagered a second glance over my shoulder. Big mistake. Like some true horror movie shit, I toppled over. Reflexively, I threw my hands out in front of me so that my palms made harsh contact with the paved sidewalk. I knew I had to get up though, because his steps were growing much louder. I began to panic as I realized that this not only because he was closer to me, but because he'd started to run. Fast. Adrenaline surged through me, urging me to scramble to my feet and get home, or at least to get help. I don't think I was even in control of my body anymore. I'd relinquished all operating power to my most basic, primal self, commanded only by the will to survive. I figure this must be true, that I must have set all cognitive processes aside in favor of escape and survival, because I startled awake this morning at home. I woke up in bed, naked, hungover, with a foul taste in my mouth that took a few times brushing my teeth to get rid of. I'm a little worn out, but I'm safe. I don't look much like I was in a fight for my life, just some scrapes and bruises here and there. My fingernails are surprisingly dirty, with some substance caked underneath them, probably dirt from when I fell. It's hard to say exactly what happened though. The adrenaline rush that came over me was so powerful that I have only a hazy recollection of the entire night, that of course in conjunction with the alcohol. My survival instincts must have carried me those last few minutes until I burst through my door. It was a close call for sure, but even closer when I opened my laptop to a news alert. Apparently, a morning jogger found a man's body, another victim of the killer. There are few details available now, but he was found on the same street I'd been pursued on last night, likely to have been killed near the same time I'd escaped. One of the detectives on the case reported that he expected an identification to be difficult, seeing as the victim had been nearly ripped to shreds. Like I said, I don't exactly remember what happened last night, but I'm comforted by the fact that I was so close to death, but that I made it home safe. I'm exhausted and I certainly look a little rough, but I'm okay. And that's something to be grateful for, don't you think? My husband recently took an overnight's job to help us out during pandemic. He's only been there about 2 weeks and works evenings or overnights, 9 p.m., 6 a.m. Last night was no different. He left home around 8:15 p.m. Our daughter, age 11, and I decided to make it a movie night. Around 11 p.m., I heard keys in my back door and the usual sounds my husband makes when he comes home. I creep out to the kitchen to make sure it was him, and it was. He told me he needed to grab his knee compression sleeve, walks down the hall, says hi to our daughter as he passes the living room, and goes upstairs. He came back down, gave me a kiss, and left again. We finished our movie and went to bed. In the morning when he got home, I made a joking comment about him forgetting his knee sleeve. He was genuinely confused as I recalled the previous night. Our daughter confirmed everything I said, and he still was acting confused. I pulled up our security motion camera on my phone to show him when he popped in quick. But there was no footage from the night before, or any other night, of him coming home after he's left for work. My daughter and I both heard him, saw him, and I touched him. But he was never home during that time. Nothing else out of the ordinary happened that night. We seriously have no idea what happened. The Crystal Creeper is what I call him, and it'll make sense later in the story. I like to go to this dispersed camping about an hour and a half from my place. I went up in the afternoon and set up camp while waiting for my cousin to arrive a few hours later. As I was sitting in a chair reading, a truck pulled up about 50 feet from me, blocking the entrance to the site. I could see a man in the driver's seat. He sat there for almost 20 minutes not getting out. Then he got out and went to the passenger side of the truck and took out a pickaxe. He walked directly over to me and said, "I'm going to be going over that way to look for some crystals," while pointing with the pickaxe. I said, okay, and he walked off. I decided to go on a walk myself in the opposite direction. I was gone for over an hour. When I was walking back to the entrance of the site, he was standing there. Just standing there looking at me. I had headphones, and so I tried to pretend I didn't see him and intended on walking up the road a bit and crossing into my site that way. As I went by though, he held out his hand and said, "Want to see the crystals? You can have one if you want." I said no thanks and decided on heading back the way I came. There was another site 100 yards away. Two guys and a teenager were drinking beer and having a good time. I definitely invaded their space, but gave them the lowdown on the Crystal Creeper and asked if I could hang with them until my cousin arrived. They were super nice and gave me a beer, and we listened to music for an hour or so. My cousin drove by and picked me up, and we headed back to the site. The guy's truck was still there, and he was just sitting in it. He was there all night, never set up a tent or even a chair. Maybe if I had accepted the crystal offer, I could have been teleported to another dimension. Well, I grew up in a haunted house. There was a huge amount of activity regularly. Most constantly was noise and things being thrown or moved. It was a very old house that has seen a lot of death, both in the home and the surrounding areas. It was an old mining town. Anyways, I would see things thrown across the room. Not just fall, but thrown so hard that if it was glass, it would break and flew from one side of the room to the other. There was also this very large black thing. You could see the shape, but there was no definition, but looked human-shaped. All I know is that it was always angry and would go out of its way to F with you. My friends wouldn't sleep over anymore because of things that happened there. Like a picture lifting away from the wall, but still sitting on the hook, like someone grabbed the bottom of it and made it swing back and forth. But it was like it was almost horizontal. It's not something an earthquake could cause without destroying the entire home. Oh, and there was an old woman who watched over the children. She was seen by multiple people. She looked like she was in her nightgown and had a sleep cap on. I remember her being kind, but it was still scary. I could go on, there are so many stories. Actually saw ball lightning as a kid, really close. I was on the right hand of the back seat of our car and looked ahead as we were slightly going uphill on a normal road of some small town. It came straight down towards us, but on the sidewalk, rolling. The insides of it were a wild mix of what some marbles look like inside and the inside of certain jellyfish, all the while shooting short blue rays of electricity in all directions. When it was about where I was, it took a sharp turn away into the yard between houses and I lost sight of it. Later in life, 2 UFOs at once. I was standing awkwardly at my window, wanting to try out my dad's tobacco pipe and saw 2 very bright blinking lights towards the horizon, motionless, and assumed they were stars. This repeated over the next couple hours. They just caught my eye when I went smoking at the window as they were in my direct line of sight. Hours later, I went to smoke once more, and as I look at the stars, both of them started taking off, the left one to the left, at the speed of what a regular plane would go, but quickly disappeared behind my window frame. The right one, though, was what convinced me it was actually UFOs. Not only that they stood still all these hours, then both take off at the same time, but the right one was just blasting off, leaving a trail behind. I watched it slack-jawed going all the way across the sky. We don't have aircraft that could go at that speed or hover in the same spot for hours on end. I get visits from invisible folk sometimes. I see the air bend around them. It's so bad, it startles me when one steps towards me. I've dodged to the side because of it before. There's smaller ones too, who love to run all over sofas and stuff, almost like a riled-up dog. I suppose the pitch-black orb that was sharply flying a curve around my head before it disappeared in the wall was related. 2 of them were frolicking through our backyard like giant apes. Actually, I heard them approach loudly from the neighbor's yard. One came swinging through the tree, the other I guess scaled the fence. Then rummaging through our bushes in absolute silence when they came the last few yards towards me. Then the awful feeling as if something sucked on my neck like 2 fleshy tubes. Around that time, it felt like the entire city was losing its mind. A drinking buddy at the bar was mentioning it too, unrelated, wondering what the heck was happening with people. Guess we'll never know. But I had the weirdest rashes at that time that still bother me after all these years. That was a surreal time, 2013-14. A few more things, but I'll leave it at that. Okay, let me start by saying, I'm a very detailed, observant people person, so I'll explain what happened as concise as possible. It was 1985, and my second year in college, and I was living in an upper floor of a co-ed college dorm in Arkansas. It was going into fall, so the nights were starting to get just a slight chill. I came home late Friday night, more like the early hours of Saturday from dancing and partying with friends. My dorm had a private fenced-in parking lot in front and free-to-others type parking behind it. Since I came home so late, literally every spot was taken in the private parking lot, and I had to park my car down the hill behind the dorm. Saturday night rolled around, and even though I was still sporting a bit of a hangover, my friends talked me into going out that night. The private parking lot was lit with huge street lights, and so was the street that ran in front where the sidewalk led you to the back lot. I took off through the parking lot and stepped onto the sidewalk and noticed a couple arm in arm walking my way. I don't think anything of it other than I was going to have to step aside and let them by as I made my way past. Both were dressed like they'd already been out having fun. As I reached them and made eye contact in the somewhat dimmer light, he looked at me. His eyes were red. I don't mean the whites of his eyes, like his whole freaking eye glowed red. I don't want to sound nuts, but it was like they were an animal's eyes reflecting in a spotlight at night. A glow. Then she glanced my way as I was passing, and her eyes were exactly the same, a solid red glow. It freaked me out bad. I basically walked and ran to my car and went out to party. I didn't tell anyone because I figured they'd think I was seeing things. But I've never seen anything like that since. I guess I'd put it out of my mind until I was talking to my spouse one night, and the memory surfaced like a nightmare. Of course I'm not scared now, that was a millennium ago. I didn't know what they could have been, but it was also the way he continued to stare as I passed that really unsettled me. I don't think I was supposed to see that. My dad swears up and down that he saw something blip on the radar, while at sea in a way that meant it was traveling at ridiculous speeds. He was an anti-air and Miss Lee guy in us Navy back in the 70s and early 80s, not paranormal, but he also told me about how when they came into port in, I think it was Romania, the KGB types would try to act like civvies and ask them things like how much money the sailors made and such. Of course, my dad told them he owned like 5 sports car back home, made 6 figures, and that the missiles on his ship could accurately hit targets well beyond their actual range. I currently live in Springfield, Massachusetts, and in May of 1973, I was a West Marine. We did a battalion-sized exercise in an area of California known as Casey Springs. We were told that there were no roads to get there. We were inserted by helicopter. I was sent out on a midnight ambush with 15 other Marines. It was a computerized war game. It worked on the computer, and so they sent Marines out to see if it could be feasibly done. What we did was we were going after an aggressor force. We set up a linear-shaped ambush, shaped like an L, and when your victims walk into it, it's a computer kill. Well, we set up this ambush at midnight, and we had 2 individuals walk into our ambush. We opened fire with blanks, and as it turns out, we thought they were bears. So we scrambled, shooting our blanks at these individuals, and they separated. One went one way and the other went the other way. We got back to our PPB, which is our platoon-sized patrol base, and we told our lieutenant what happened. He radioed it to our commander. This was the first night of a 4-day war game, and it was cancelled. We were given orders to light a large fire, get a fixed bayonet, and stand on a 360 around our blazing fire. All through that night, we heard high-pitched screams. The only way I can describe it was that of a death call of a bear, and in the morning we had 2 helicopters come in with base game wardens and some other fellas. To this day, I don't know who they are. We were made to bring them back to the area where this happened. 2 of the individuals walked where we directed them, and we were ordered to leave the area. And this is something the Marine Corps does not do. To cancel a computerized war game. There were over 3,000 Marines involved in this. The logistics and the money that was spent on this, and it was canceled. Growing up, I lived in northeastern Arizona, literally about 5 miles south of the Navajo Reservation in Winslow. Naturally, being that close to the reservation, or the res, skinwalkers were a huge topic of conversation amongst the locals, and we all took it very seriously. Stories of personal experiences abounded. I was no different. My family had gone camping in a little spot about 50 miles or so south of town called Hart Canyon, near Wiggins Crossing if anyone is interested. We had been there all day, and I was extremely familiar with the area as we had camped there 20 or so times before. So my parents let me just wander about alone in the woods. This was back in the early 90s. Anyway, I had some Gijos that I had been playing with in a nearby creek, about 80 yards from our campsite. There were no other campers there with us. My mom had called me back to camp for dinner, so I left and ate. Played around camp for a while and realized that I'd forgotten my toys back at the creek. So I took a flashlight and headed back that way. I knew right where I had left them, so in no time I found them and grabbed them up. As I squatted down to grab them on the edge of the water, a sudden urgency that I'd never felt before ran down my spine. I remember feeling frozen because of the fear. Like the little boy on Et when the alien comes out of the field for the first time, and he's trying to scream for his family. I looked up and pointed my flashlight to the other side of the creek, and about 10 yards down the way, I saw something. At first, I thought it was a deer, but it was standing up, so I thought it may be a bear. But it was too skinny and did not have enough poofy hair. It skunked behind a tree and peered out slightly at me. I seriously was too scared to move. I had just read a bit about Bigfoot for the first time since it wasn't really popular in my area. I thought for a long time that that's what I saw. I finally had seen enough to gather my wits and scramble as fast as I could back to camp. I told my parents, and they kind of dismissed it as my imagination. So I just stayed close the rest of the trip. About 2 years later, I was at my house. I had 2 dogs. They were outside dogs and lived their whole lives in my backyard. One night they went psycho, barking at first at something in the alley behind my house. Then they both started whimpering. I had my window open slightly, and one of my dogs straight up jumped up to the window, frantically chewed through the screen of the window, forced its way into the house, and would not leave the house for 3 days. Another time when I was about 13. We used to play night games in the town. Mostly there being nothing much else to do, we would walk around our neighborhood and act suspicious, so the cops would come chase us around. and we run down the alleyways and hop into random folks' backyards to hide. Now, it was extremely common to see an intoxicated Navajo or Hopi in the alley, so it was no big deal to see one in the alley behind my house that night as we being two of my friends and myself ran from a police car hot on our tail. We saw him plain as day standing in our way. We ran around him and jumped into the nearest yard to hide. We waited for the cop to pass us and hopped back out. Literally about 3 minutes went by. We ran back the way we came, and as we got to the point where the drunk man had been, he was gone. In his place was a coyote sitting there watching us. We ran right past it, feet from it. And anyone who knows coyotes knows they will bail out way before you get close to them. This bugger held his ground and calmly sat and watched us run past him. We all freaked out and stayed inside for a month. My last experience was when I was about 15 or 16. My brother has a girlfriend who lives in a small community south of Winslow called Starlight Pines, about 25 miles-ish. Well, we went to see her one day, and as we drove out, about 15 miles out, we saw a native guy standing on the side of the road. This was quite odd because the res was north of town, and it was rare to see anyone on foot south of town because it's just desert and forest for literally 80 miles. Anyway, we see this guy, he looked normal enough. Flannel shirt, jeans. We got to our destination and hung out with my brother's girlfriend and her family well into the night when we decided to head back home. Hopped in his truck, a Chevy S10, and drove back the way we came. In the same spot, we saw the native dude, he was still there. I remember thinking, that dude is crazy standing out there all day and into the night, what's he doing? Right as we passed him, we heard a loud bang on the back of the truck. At first, I thought we hit an animal, but I hadn't felt anything that we'd run over. I turned around and looked out the back window. My brother started to slow down, thinking there may be something wrong with the truck. In the brake lights, I see the native guy chasing after us. We are easily going 55 to 60 at this point as we were about to stop. The guy is in the road, feet behind us. I scream at my brother to not stop. Gun it, man, gun it. He does, and being a Chevy S10, it had a speed governor on it at 80. 2 miles. This guy keeps up with us. We are seriously freaking out. I asked my brother, what if we don't make it back to town, or what about when we have to slow down once we get close? After those 2 miles that stretched forever, I looked back and he was gone. We got home, booked it into the house, and told our parents. The next morning, I get up to head somewhere and look at my brother's truck, thinking about the night before. I wondered what the loud bang was just before we started getting chased. Inspecting the truck, I found a handprint smeared in the dust from about 2/3 over to the right, then smeared to the right taillight. I never went there again. Sorry, it was so long. But those are my experiences with what I'm convinced were skinwalkers.
I was hoping you may be able to help. My research partner and me have a bit of a problem with a dogman at his cabin here in southeast Ohio. We have been researching the Ohio grassman for about 2 years together. Well, now we have this dogman really becoming a problem. Since January 3rd of this year, this thing has been pissing on his cabin about 4 feet up in various spots. It has taken a frontal bite out one of his trees, it slashed one of them. It hangs out in the wee hours most nights growling all around his cabin. We have it on video, audio S&D trail cam, so we know what we are dealing with. We are just asking for some advice on how to deal with it. This place where his cabin is a campground that is primarily closed for the winter. There are a handful of year-round residents, but a total of maybe 8. It is opening up for the season now, and we don't want anyone getting hurt. It is more of an upright dog than a wolf. He is getting more aggressive with time. My partner, being an ex-Army Ranger, does not scare easily, but this thing finally wore him out to the point he left his cabin and went back to his homestead to regroup. Our thinking at the moment is to try S&D take it out. We started on a plan that we think will work, problem being we think there is more than one. There are grassmen all around this area, we have them on audio and photos, but neither is deterring the others. Any advice you have would be greatly appreciated. We don't really want to kill it, but it's getting to that point. We also don't want to draw attention to the area. The last thing we want is a bunch of people running around looking for it. Thanks for your time. My mother just told me that a few days ago, on her way to work at 5 a.m., she saw red eye shine in the corner of her eye from her headlights. She tried to look at what had caused it, but what she saw made her shiver. The creature was about my father's height, which is 6 feet or more, and it turned towards the cornfield after looking at my mother's vehicle from the side of the road. As she passed it, all she could see was the back end. She described it as a naked man with dark gray or black wolf-like hair with no tail. After she passed it, she kept watching it and saw it turn its head to look at her, but it did not turn its body, unlike how a Bigfoot would. Its body remained still. She said she saw incredible intelligence, but also felt an evil presence. A few months prior, on my way home from work at 11:30 p.m., I saw red eye shine, and then a large creature sped across the road about 3,000–4,000 yards in front of me. It had black fur, a long muzzle with a large head, broad shoulders with what seemed like a mane around it, large and long front and back legs at a strange angle, and no tail. When it happened, the first thing that came to my mind was an impossible mix between a wolf and a wild boar. At the time, I didn't know about the dogman, but after learning about it, that's what I believed that creature had to be. All of these incidents occurred in Morrow County, Ohio. Another sighting happened last week outside of Mount Vernon, Knox County, Ohio, about 35–45 miles from our house. I'm from a small Midwestern town. Nothing like what I saw happens here to my knowing, and is pretty much completely normal. This took place in fall of my 7th grade, so around 2016–2017. Even though it was a few years ago, I know that I saw something, but I'm not 100% sure what I saw. By the way, I'm telling this in first person simply because it's easier. Kylie, my mom, called up the stairs. I quickly went towards her voice as she began to explain. Your dad and I are heading out for the night. She clipped in a gold earring. Do you mind walking the dog before we leave? I simply nodded in response, clipping in the dog's leash as she continued talking about what they were doing that night. It was late November night and the sun had already set. By the time my mom finished talking and the dog was clipped in and ready to go, I closed the front door and immediately felt chills, not only from the temperature, but the atmosphere. Not one person was out. It not that late, is it? I said to my dog with no response. I had made it half a street when my dog had stopped to sniff something on the ground. I looked out at the road ahead, nothing but houses and one stop sign. My brain immediately thought back to a dumb video my friend and I watched trying to scare ourselves in class. Where just like me, someone walking looks up at a stop sign to see a woman staring back at them, literally standing on the stop sign. I'm no one, I say, looking down from the bold red sign. I still couldn't shake a creepy feeling as I looked down the road. My heart stopped. I'll try my best to describe the horrifying sight I saw. Looking back at me was about an 8–9 feet tall shadowy figure. Something with 2 legs, tall and skinny. Arms even longer, reaching the ground, but just as skinny. The body round, completed with a long skinny neck and no face. Once again I say no face. I was purely terrified. I pulled my dog to run, but she was frozen. I yelled out to her, making it hear then see me in the process. It began to follow us, in what I can only call a drunk on a tightrope walk. In response, I ran with all my might, cutting through my neighbor's backyard. In the process, I slipped and fell, all while running on the muddy grass. I turned around, picking up my dog in one motion. It was even closer now. My head was pounding as I ran with tears in my eyes. Turning around, I fixed my grip on the dog and ran for my life. I opened my back door, throwing us inside. It's going to get me. I yell as my parents run to me. Thank God they hadn't left yet. Truly believing I was almost kidnapped, my dad ran outside. I sat for the next few minutes sobbing, trying to explain the events that just occurred to my mom. My Ada walked in through the back door and simply said, "There's no one." Ever since that day, I've had terrible problems with anxiety and depression. To be fair, it could have nothing to do with what I saw, but I have to think a small part of it was from the pure terror I saw that day. My name is of no importance, for I am a CIA operative and anonymity is my shield. Today I find myself compelled to share a true story, one that defies explanation and haunts my thoughts to this day. And so I have chosen to submit my account to your YouTube channel, hoping to find solace in the collective disbelief of others. So it all began when I was deployed to the war-torn African nation of Congo. My mission was clear: infiltrate a terrorist organization and gather vital intelligence regarding their plans for a possible chemical attack on a major city. The gravity of the task at hand weighed heavily upon my shoulders, and the stakes were as high as they could be. As an agent of the CIA, I had witnessed my fair share of atrocities and the horrors of war. Africa was something else. It was a place consumed by chaos and despair, ravaged by years of conflict. Yet amidst the devastation, something else lurked, something far more inexplicable. One fateful night, while on patrol deep within the dense woods, a feeling of unease settled upon me. The darkness was impenetrable. Suddenly, as if emerging from the very shadows themselves, I saw it. A creature resembling something akin to a yeti stood before me. Its unkempt brown hair hung loosely, swaying in the slight breeze. Its eyes, a piercing yellow glow, fixated on me with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. I watched in awe as it sniffed the air, its grotesque form devoid of a nose or mouth. It stood upright on two legs, a bipedal enigma that defied all logical explanation. Time stood still as I observed this inexplicable sight. But just as suddenly as it had appeared, the creature vanished into nearby woods. I was left standing there, heart pounding and mind racing to comprehend the impossible. The rational part of me insisted it was a hallucination or a figment of my exhausted imagination. But deep down, I knew what I had witnessed was real. Seeking answers, I approached the locals the following day, inquiring about any known wildlife that matched the description of the creature I had seen. To my bewilderment, they shook their heads in confusion. They told me there were no such animals in those parts. No wild creatures with brown hair and glowing yellow eyes. It was as if the creature existed only within the boundaries of my perception. Now, as I sit here, sharing my account with you, I am plagued by a maelstrom of questions. What was that creature? Was it a mere anomaly, a result of my mind playing tricks on me? Or was it something more, something that lurked in the depths of the unexplored, waiting to be discovered? I was driving through northwestern Connecticut at around 12:15 this morning, just enjoying the quietness of the road. The night was dark, with only my headlights illuminating the path ahead. As I continued along the deserted road, something caught my attention in the distance. There, walking on the road, was a figure. It stood at an astonishing height of around 8 feet, towering over everything around it. My curiosity piqued, and I couldn't help but wonder who or what it could be. I decided to turn on my high beams to get a better look. As the bright light flooded the area, the figure came into focus. It was completely black, almost as if it absorbed the light around it. The size of this being was remarkable, with a muscular and imposing build that sent shivers down my spine. It appeared to be humanoid in shape, but there was something unsettling about its presence. What happened next sent a chill down my spine. As soon as the figure noticed my high beams piercing through the darkness, it seemed to react. Its pace quickened, almost like a speed walk, as if it didn't want to be exposed to the light any longer. In a matter of seconds, it vanished into the nearby woods, blending seamlessly with the surrounding darkness. I was left stunned, my mind racing to comprehend what I had just witnessed. What was that creature? What was it doing out there on that desolate road in the dead of night? The questions swirled in my head, but I had no answers. I grew up a hardcore atheist and non-believer in the paranormal. Even the thought of ET, life forms with technology capable of light-speed travel, seemed far-fetched and improbable. God seemed impossible, and if God did exist according to a scripture, I felt like he was a being without good morals. Around 2017, I became more of an agnostic who shattered his ideals of absolution, but still needed evidence for proof. I don't claim to know what could or could not be out there anymore. All I know is that the possibility remains. My father lives off Highway 44 between St. James and Cuba, Missouri. For several years, he has had strange events and sightings at his house and in his area. Going back to 2018, my father, my brother, and I were out at the barn late at night, roughly 10 p.m., doing work on my father's truck. We usually have some type of firearm nearby. As I was smoking a cigarette outside of the barn, I felt really uneasy. Nothing had happened out of the ordinary, but I felt like I was being watched by someone having a scope on my forehead. The neighbors live about a quarter-mile down the road on one side of my father's house, and on the other side is an open field. In front of the house is the road with the woods on the other side of the road, and behind the house is about 4 acres of land stretching all in a square that is mostly open with scattered trees, and the forest is the edge of the property. I felt like the threat was coming from the woods behind the house. I told my father and brother, but they felt fine. He told me that if I felt off, to shoot several slugs in that direction. So I shot 3 slugs off into the woods. I didn't hear anything more, but the feeling persisted for about another 10 minutes or so. I figured I was psyching myself out and didn't think much of the situation. This happened near late summer or early fall, I believe. Nearly a year later, in mid-July, I went back down there. This time my father instructed me to listen for a sound. It was nearly inaudible. It sounded like a heartbeat coming from the floor of his house. It was only possible to hear it if everything was dead silent and your head was near the floor. Nothing shook, but the sound was so consistent that it persisted at all times of the day and for over several months. I asked him if it was still happening when I left, and he would always tell me that it was, until about October, I believe. It was odd, to say the least, but it never made me feel unsafe. However, in September I went down there for a weekend and had one of the scariest encounters of my life. I felt like a small child who wanted to cry for help. My father, my brother, their dog, and my cousin all went to town. So instead of sleeping on the couch, I went to sleep in my father's room. It was roughly 8:10 a.m. when I went to sleep on his king-sized memory foam mattress. I don't know how much time had passed when I fell back to sleep, but I was suddenly woke from my slumber when I felt the bed slightly moved. I figured the dog had jumped up, but I was so tired I didn't even open my eyes. Seconds later, the bed violently raised and slammed up and down for what seemed to be about 10-20 seconds. Scared out of my mind, I was paralyzed still. I didn't hear anything other than the bed slamming and the box fan being swept across the floor. As soon as it stopped, I opened my eyes and looked around the small room. There was a closet near the door that was closed and the door that was cracked open, which is not unusual. Afraid to move for nearly 20 minutes, I just sat there. I was hoping that nothing was in the closet. I grabbed the shotgun near the bed and opened up the closet, and it was empty. I then checked the rest of the house. Some open windows with the screens still in and both doors leading outside bolted locked. I proceeded to look online if an earthquake had happened. It didn't make sense because the box fan had been moved nearly 5 feet and was on the floor face down. My family returned after this incident about 2 hours later, and I kept silent because I forced myself to believe it was my imagination. Nearly 2 years later, in 2021, the unexplained phenomena started to happen on almost a weekly basis. My brother moved out, so the only 2 people who noticed it were me when I was down there and my father. He started off the conversation when I arrived there one Friday night with, "I am not on drugs, but I need your eye to tell me if I'm going insane." Since I was more open-minded at this time, I agreed to listen and look at what he wanted to show me. It was nearly 11 p.m., and he instructed me towards his room to shut off his lights. What I saw was a silhouette humanoid figure that would almost leave tracers of itself as it would walk between 2 different trees in the backyard, from point A to point B. However, at point B, the figure would basically teleport back to point A and repeat the cycle. It also happened in my brother's room, except the figure would seemingly disappear and reappear behind multiple different trees, but still in a pattern. I honestly thought my father's eyes and my eyes were playing tricks on us, and I was feeding off his delusions. That's until I saw a light flashing in the woods. It looked yellowish-orange, but it flickered 3 times right at the house in 3-second intervals that would slowly fade down. He didn't see it at that time, nor did he tell me about it. But when I told him what I had just seen, it was as if I had just confirmed his fears. He said that he had also seen lights in the same area of the woods. We both covered our windows that night with blackout sheets and slept with a firearm next to our bed. I would also hear almost stomping sounds in the attic late at night, almost any time I was down there for a 2-3 day period. Too scared to check, we just ignored it. I've also seen rusted metal illuminate green, which is highly odd. For the first time, I saw the shadows before I convinced myself they were real. I coughed up multiple ideas as to what was causing them. Maybe it was the moon and the clouds. Nope, it was a new moon, and there was a single cloud in the sky. Maybe it was something like a bird, bat, bug flying around the pole lights. The pole lights don't reach the edge of the woods, and the silhouette was so dark it was as if some mass had to be right there. These are all my first-hand accounts. I have several other accounts I could add to these, but it could just be more of a coincidence than actual strange occurrences. I don't scare easily, nor do I usually believe in the supernatural, but I'm now a believer. I was fishing a lazy little river bend in southern Indiana one summer. I had ridden my motorcycle into the middle of nowhere, stopped to fish off of a little dirt road. A few hours later, I had wandered up and down the bank a good ways. I ended up getting pretty hung up in what appeared to be a decently deep area. After fighting the line for a bit, I decided to cut the line and my losses and call it a day. I took my knife and snipped the line. Started back up the bank towards the bike and noticed a glint of something shinning in the water. I got closer, waited for the current to clear up a bit, and could make out a car bumper. I got down in the water a bit and could make out an old 70s-ish sedan sitting almost nose up in the water. Extremely intrigued, I decided to come back in a few days when the water cleared up. We had just got a decent amount of rain, so cloudy water conditions. I come back a few days later. Water cleared up well, and since it flows for a while over limestone, it was mostly clear. I could make out several cars down in the water. 2 old sedans and a pickup. They had been there for a very long time. Years at least. I called the local DNR to report it. They said they'd send someone out to take a look. I end up in the area a few months later and just swing by out of blind wonder, and the deep hole was devoid of all cars. No telling what the hell the deal was. It did freak me out at first. Sorry for the rant. Lots of coffee this home. So just like that, something I couldn't see lifted the edge of my bed. I had my TV on a static channel, but had recently gotten in trouble for all my lights being on at night. I've always been afraid of what's in the dark, but my parents couldn't afford the light bill, so I knew I had to turn it off before I fell asleep. I finally got the guts to do so, and I nestle in under my covers to cower until I fall asleep. I'm drifting a little bit, happy nothing scared me that night, when all of a sudden the top right corner of my bed in relation to me lifts up a good 1.5 feet before falling back down, thumping me along with it. I had just a mattress because I like that sort of thing, just laying on the floor by the wall. They didn't lift at all, just the corner by my head. A holes. I jump up so fast and ran to the living room. I checked on all my siblings, checked to hear if my mom and dad were sleeping, and everyone in the house was. I woke my parents reluctantly, but I was sobbing. They told me I could sleep in the living room, but I got the creeps in there worse, so I just broke the rules and went to bed with the lights on. But literally to this day I am taken aback. The memory doesn't scare me. It's been a good 15 years, and I now threaten the things I can't see back like a crazy head. So they know I mean business, but it was so real. It happened, and I can't explain it from today's science. Had to be a ghosty or something. I am a logger in northern British Columbia, Canada. I am an avid hunter and have spent many a nights hunting alone. That being said, quite a few years ago, I was working on a broken down skidder in the dark after everyone on the logging block was gone. changing a blown hydraulic hose under the cab when I felt like I was being watched. The feeling continued to get worse and worse, so I was on edge and continued to work on replacing the blown hose. Every trip for tools to the service truck and back, I would scan for eyes in the nearby tree line about 25 meters away with my flashlight. Nothing. Continued to work on the pain in the ass hose that you literally have to dive your head and upper body under the cab to reach. And so your legs are stuck up in the air and feeling vulnerable. The feeling of being watched gets more intense. All the hairs on my neck are standing, and I hear a two-tone whistle from far away. Almost as if it was wind, it was so far away, but it was flat calm that day. Also, there was about 6 foot of fresh snow on the ground. I pushed myself out from under the skidder and looked around quietly with a flashlight for eyes in the tree line and down the road. Nothing. I had one side of the hose fitting to remove still, and it was the easier side and higher up, so I wasn't ass over tea kettle removing it. I put my head back under the cab and quickly began to spin the fitting loose. The feeling of being watched was so bad every hair on my body was standing, and then I hear the same two-tone whistle very loudly in the tree line directly behind me. I had the hose off at the exact same time, so I whipped myself out from under the cab and turned ready to throw down with a one wrench in my hand, yelling, "All right, where the F are ya?" Nothing, no one there, no tracks, no eyes, no wind, nothing. The flashlight I had was more of a small floodlight for working on repair stuff, so it didn't light up inside the trees. The next day it had snowed another 6 or so, but I went and hiked the tree line with a 12 gauge and 7.3 slugs ready to go. No tracks that I could see, no perches on the trees where snow had been pushed off if it was a bird. Nothing. A couple of years ago, I used to work at a little coffee shop. I loved that place. It was super chill. The kind of place all the real hipsters went to get coffee. Hipsters and old people. I usually worked afternoons and evenings, which weren't as busy as the morning, so oftentimes the manager would leave me to it, and I would be running the whole place by myself. One afternoon this lady came in, and to this day I have never seen a more bizarre-looking person. I've moved to Austin, Texas since. You know, the place famous for being weird. So trust me, this lady was really bizarre. Her hair was short and up in 2 knots, Miley Cyrus style. She was wearing a bright pink leather biker jacket, a long skirt, and sunglasses that she never took off. You probably won't believe this next part, but I swear it's true. It sounds like I'm just trying to make it sound weirder, but this is what happened. She was pushing one of those toy strollers for little girls as baby dolls, and in it was her purse. Her purse was open because it was overfilled with bananas. She was pushing around a purse full of bananas in a toy stroller, so she walks up to the counter. "Hey, what can I get for you?" "MMFPHHM, I'm sorry, what did you say?" "HHHHI coffee, all right, a regular coffee, do you want creamer?" She didn't even respond, so I assumed she didn't want any. She paid for her coffee and then went into this hallway in the back that led into a somewhat secluded area from the rest of the seating. At this point, I'm thinking she must be really high on something, which would have explained the sunglasses. Anyway, business slows down eventually, and I take the opportunity to sweep up the floor a bit. When I come out from behind the counter, she's sitting in the back of that hallway next to the cleaning supplies closet, which she has opened. She has also set up a bunch of those cards you get from like Target or something around her table, so that no one can see what she's doing. I walk over to get the broom out of the closet, and as I walk past her, I sneak a peek at what she was trying to hide on that table, because who wouldn't? She was burning incense sticks and mumbling to herself. I'm kind of scared to ask her to stop at this point, so I just leave her alone and get the broom and close the closet door. When I come back from sweeping the floor, she has opened the closet door again. I put the broom inside and close it again. So later it's closing time and she's still here. She's been sitting there burning incense sticks, mumbling and opening that closet door for almost 4 hours. I yell out to let everyone know that we're closing, and they all leave. I go out to pick up people's dishes and look back into the hallway. She's still sitting there. "Hey, we're closing." I'm gonna have to ask you to leave. Kay. She doesn't move at all. I'm sure as hell not gonna walk over there and try to force her to leave because she's obviously totally insane, so I just decide that maybe she'll get up in a minute. I finish up most of my closing jobs, which takes about 15 minutes, and she is still there. Hey, you have to leave. Kay. At this point, she is creeping me the F out. It's just me and her alone in this restaurant at night. She's obviously a lunatic, and she won't leave. I walked back into the kitchen and just stood there clutching the biggest knife I could find. But then through the door that goes out to the counter, I saw her on her way to leave. She was walking very, very slowly. Suddenly she stopped and stood still, just standing there doing nothing. She stood like that for 5 whole minutes. Then she proceeded walking as slowly as possible toward the door. It took her another 5 minutes to reach it. Once she did reach it, she noticed some newspapers and advertisements we have on a little counter next to it. She stared at them for a while, and then she took all of them, one at a time, and put them carefully in her stroller. This took her about another 5 minutes. While she was doing this, someone came from outside and opened the door to come in. She froze immediately, not moving a muscle, and stood there blocking the doorway. Eventually, the person carefully moved around her, and I told them we were closed, so they turned around and left. The lady did not move again until the person was gone. She then finally left and continued walking at the same incredibly slow pace on the sidewalk. She left a bunch of those advertisements and newspapers on the floor that I had to pick up. Weirdest thing that's ever happened to me. Several years ago, I suffered from a manic episode which led to squatting in a vacant home. Long story short, I was eventually picked up by the police and held for about a month until I was allowed to post bail. After I was processed and put into a cell, I became claustrophobic and began to panic. I began pounding on the plexiglass door and shouting into the intercom in my cell. Finally, they asked if I thought I was a harm to myself or others. Now, some people who have dealt with the mental health industry may know that this is the fundamental justification for what's called a 5150, a mandatory 72-hour hold at a mental hospital. I thought to myself that this could be my way of getting entrance to a mental hospital. So I told the person at the other end of the intercom that yes, I was a danger to myself or others. Unfortunately, that was not the case. Instead, they dragged me out of my cell, twisting my arm and leg, and put me in solitary confinement. They had me stripped of all clothing, not even underwear, and left me with 2 coarse green woven nylon blankets, one with Velcro to attach to my body, affectionately known as a turtle suit. The walls and floors were dirty and rubberized. In the middle of the floor was a brass-ringed hole to use as a toilet. A camera stared at me from a corner in the ceiling. There was no bed or chair. The lights were on at all hours. Cold air poured in from a loud vent in the ceiling at all times, making it impossible to ever feel comfortably warm. In order to retain heat and feel comfortable against the floor, I'd use one of the blankets as a cushion to lie on, while the other I'd use to cover my body in a fetal position and block out the light. There was no intercom or plexiglass door now. Just a small window to barely see someone walk past my cell through a hallway that gave no allusion to the time of day or night. The only way to generally tell time was by when I'd be fed, they'd drop the food directly in my hands through a small slot in the door 3 times a day. I'd have to finish what was in my hand before they'd give me more or let me drink from a pixie cup of water or carton of milk. They didn't tell me how long I would be there for. They wouldn't answer questions. The isolation and boredom would just cause me to find delusional justifications for why I was there. It must be some sort of test, right? Sometimes I'd bang on the door yelling for help, to be let out for water, or I'd curse at the deaf guards that would never answer me. Eventually, I found a sort of rhythm of sleeping or lying awake beneath my blanket between meals. Sometime on the 3rd day, I had a moment where I finally let go. All of my fear and worry. Anticipation and expectation to leave just left my mind and body. A warmth filled me. Nothing mattered in that moment, and I felt at peace. Then it was gone. It lasted less than a second. Afterwards, all I could do was think of that moment, try to find that place somewhere inside me again, while I lay on the ground in my little rubber refrigerator. It was the feeling of a miracle. There's no better way to describe it, to feel happiness in such a place. I was confined for 4 days before they took me out for my first court appearance. As they escorted me through the hall and the exterior doors to the awaiting van, I got to see the blue sky and feel the warm summer air on my face. I immediately cried and thanked the guards. I can still feel the icy grip of fear clawing at my heart every time I think back to that ill-fated hunting trip in the cursed woods of Kentucky. It was a day that would forever haunt my dreams, a day when my faith in the known world was shattered, and the boundaries of reality were pushed to their limits. The woods in Kentucky had always held a sinister reputation among hunters and locals. They spoke of strange happenings, eerie sounds, and an overwhelming sense of dread that seemed to permeate the very air. But for a group of seasoned hunters like us, stories of curses and ghost stories were nothing but campfire entertainment until that day. We were a group of 5, including me, Jake, the unofficial leader of our little expedition, and my lifelong friends Mike, Tom, Sarah, and Mark. We had ventured deep into the heart of the supposedly cursed reserve, seeking the thrill of the hunt and hoping to prove that the legends were nothing more than superstitions. As the sun dipped below the thick canopy of trees, casting eerie shadows upon us, we decided to split into 2 groups, with each group pursuing different game, deer and ducks. It was in that fateful decision that our nightmare began. My group consisted of Mike, Tom, and me. We ventured deeper into the woods, our rifles at the ready, scanning the surroundings for any sign of prey. The air was thick with tension, and an eerie silence hung around us. Then, as we entered a small clearing, something caught our attention. It was a presence, a feeling of being watched that sent shivers down my spine. I exchanged nervous glances with Mike and Tom, and we silently decided to investigate. Our eyes widened in horror as we saw an unknown predator, a monstrous creature that defied all logic and explanation. It had to be at least 9 feet tall, with shoulders as wide as 4 feet. Its stringy hair did little to conceal the bulging muscles beneath, which flexed with each movement. Its thighs were as round as tree trunks, and it had hardly a neck to speak of, with a head that tapered into a cone-like shape. Its long arms swung menacingly by its side. I would describe it as a half-gorilla and half-Neanderthal man-type animal, a grotesque amalgamation of the prehistoric and the otherworldly. We were paralyzed by fear, unable to comprehend the monstrous being before us. Our rifles were clenched tightly in trembling hands, ready to fire, but the creature seemed to sense our presence. Its head turned slowly in our direction, and its eyes, dark and soulless, met ours. Time stood still as a shiver of dread washed over us. In that heart-pounding moment, the creature began to run, its massive form moving gracefully on 2 legs. Panic overtook us, and we opened fire, but our shots missed their mark as we fired blindly in sheer terror. The creature showed no signs of injury, and the deafening roar of the gunshots only seemed to fuel its relentless pursuit. In our desperation, we abandoned our rifles, the very tools of our trade, and ran for our lives. The woods, once familiar and inviting, had transformed into a labyrinth of shadows and horrors. We pushed through thick underbrush, our hearts pounding in our chests, our breaths ragged. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we stumbled upon another group of hunters. Breathless and wild-eyed, we recounted our harrowing encounter with the unknown predator, but their skeptical expressions greeted our story. They dismissed our story as an overactive imagination or the stress of the hunt getting the better of us. But we knew what we had seen, what we had felt deep in our bones, a creature that defied all rational explanation, a nightmare lurking in the depths of those cursed woods. I'm 38 and an Army veteran trying to work as a local carpenter in Maine, the state where I have almost always lived. I've had 2 encounters with a creature I will soon tell you about, one that occurred when I was a teenager and actually one a couple years ago. The house I am currently living in is my father's since he now has multiple heart conditions and would have to live alone. I and my sister grew up in this house, which is in eastern Maine. Living here as a child always felt a little off, as if something was not right in a way. It's hard to describe. The house is surrounded by woods on almost all sides and sits on a dead-end road with 6 or 7 houses down the way. We own 70 acres of dense forest that are littered with ATV trails and walking trails. I've been out on these trails over 100 times, probably just clearing them for neighbors who we let use them and just trying to maintain them. But every time I'm out there, I feel like I'm being stalked. In this area, I nor my father have ever seen a bear, wolf, or mountain lion, nothing really above the size of a bobcat. As a teen, I liked dressing up in military gear and going out to play war and games similar. Normally go out with my friends Sid and Marvin, 2 guys who lived down the road. Sid was an older dude around 18 who smoked and did average, tough guy stuff. Marv, who I still am friends with today, we even served together until he was discharged, was more on my level. We were both pretty timid young guys who didn't really associate with most people and just enjoyed being out in the woods and chilling. Anyway, one day we had gone out around 3 p.m. on a chilly winter evening to go play, as we did most days. We all grabbed our gear, which was stuff that Sid's dad, who was a Vietnam vet, had given him, and then Sid had shared with us. This included medical kits, an ammo box, grenade pouches, etc. He even gave Sid an old handgun without the magazine or ammunition, but Sid's dad still didn't allow him to take it out of the house. So after a while of walking down one of the paths, we come to one of our favorite spots, which is sort of like a clearing full of boulders and moss. At the time it was covered in knee-deep snow. Normally my mother would not have let us go out this far, but she wasn't there to say no, since she was in New Hampshire for the holidays. We had been out there for quite a while, throwing snowballs and pretending they were grenades and blasting at each other with our sticks. It was about 5 p.m. when we were starting to gather our stuff because it was beginning to get dark. As I'm scooping up my stuff, Marv talks in a confused and worrisome tone. "Hey guys, what the hell is that thing?" He draws our attention to a tall, completely black creature standing on 2 legs, its arms dangling by its sides and dragging through the snow. From our angle at 50 or 60 meters away, we couldn't see its face, but it was walking away from us. I remember a weird tightness in my chest after realizing that I had no idea what we were looking at. Then Sid yelled out, "Hey, hairball." Then the creature stopped. My chest grew even tighter, and it felt like my body was frozen after I saw its abrupt stop. It slowly turned towards us. Its face had no facial features, but it looked to be plain flesh. No nose, eyes, or mouth. We were so frightened that none of us could talk. It stared at us for a couple minutes before one of us suggested the bright idea of leaving. We crept away as the sun was now really low, while one of us constantly looked back until we got out of sight. Then we bolted back to my house, where we hid inside, collapsing onto the living room floor. We were silent for a moment before I broke out laughing. The others joined in. After a few seconds, Sid said, "Okay guys, but WTF did we just see?" We tried rationalizing, but I think we all knew that we had seen something that didn't belong. The guys ended up staying the night at my place that night. We stayed up late drinking hot chocolate, and every now and then stepping onto the front porch to see if it may have followed us. After a couple days, the creature mostly disappeared from our minds. We still got together and hung out having adventures in the woods. I never told my parents about this thing that we saw because they probably would have believed me, and I didn't want to go through all the trouble of explaining it to them over and over. Neither did I tell my sister because she wouldn't care and I wouldn't receive any feedback, so it was pointless. We 3 also never really brought the creature up again. It was like an unspoken agreement. My second encounter transpired in roughly the same area about a mile or 2 from there 3 years ago. I had just been honorably discharged and been home with my father for no more than a month, picking up odd jobs, mostly in auto and house repairs, both being skills I learned from my time overseas. It was a summer evening when I decided to head out on the trails and take a look around. After all, I haven't been out there for ages and expected the trails to be overgrown. So I took with me some basic brush clearings equipment such as a hatchet, an old machete, and some other stuff, and then set out. Sid had recently moved to Vermont and Marv had been medically discharged a while ago and left with a leg disability, making it hard to walk. I would have asked him to join me if not for his disability. I had made it half a mile into the main path, moving and cutting up the suspected limbs, branches, and overgrown grass as best as possible, hoping to come back tomorrow with a weed whacker to do some more work. As I got deeper, the feeling of being watched returned, the same feeling I got as a teenager when I was out there. And I began noticing that the dense growth was getting thinner and more limbs were smashed or pushed out of the way. As well, the tall grass and overgrowth were no longer in the way. In fact, the trail became almost cleared and looked like it used to. I was shocked that somebody cared enough to come out here and clear all this. But as I thought on it more, I remembered that the entrance hadn't been groomed. So how did they get in? I began looking closely at the ground, noticing feet or paw prints I had never seen before. I crouched down to gain a better look. The print had 3 pointy toes, each about 6 inches long, and were spaced about 3 feet apart in sets of 2. I didn't recognize these and decided to just follow them a little further to check it out. About a quarter of a mile later, I see this creature. My second encounter, and so far my last time. It was walking from the side of the path at a slow pace, not acknowledging my presence. Not yet, at least. It slowly crossed the path and continued into the woods, and after a minute I walked up to the area where he had entered, and there it was strolling or creeping into the woods, still not noticing me. I could hear his arms dragging across the forest floor, and his fur coat still looked silky black. Yet I wanted to see its face again, but not to the point where I would risk being spotted. So I slowly reached for my phone, only to realize that it was in the front pocket of my backpack, as I didn't want to lose it while working. I pulled the bag from my shoulders and placed it in front of me and began unzipping the pocket. But as I did, the creature stopped as he had done the last time. "Oh Lord Jesus," I thought as I froze and my chest tightened. It began to turn. Its fleshy face began staring back at me. I tightened the grip on the hatchet I had in hand, and now that I think about it, that probably wouldn't have done much to the 8-foot behemoth, now that I think about it. We both stared motionless for what felt like hours. In reality, I had no idea how long we had been there. I eventually stood up with my legs feeling numb. I backed away until it was out of sight, and then took off as fast as I could go. As I was running, I was sure I heard a violent scream from behind me, but I wasn't going to turn to look. Long story short, I haven't been back in those woods for 3 years and don't plan on it either. I know this may sound over-exaggerated or fake, like something from a children's book, but I know what I saw and Marvin knows what he saw. I will never forget this. I was living in a travel trailer for a time on my sister's property, about 3 acres or so, circa the summer of 2019. The house was in the front on half the property, and I was in the wildlands backfield behind the backyard. This was near Redding, California, and the Sacramento River, only several blocks away, basically in the country and county outside of town, but quite a few residences up and down the streets around the area on big lots. I don't remember what made me open the door and stick my head out to look around one late evening, but something caused me to do it. Maybe some noise. As I was looking around, I heard what sounded like several very slow footsteps in dry brush, going crack, snap, crack, like someone was walking away slowly, kind of being stealthy. I then realized it was right there, about 15 feet away, maybe on this side of the see-through wire fence, but it could have been right on the other side of the neighbor's property back section. So I was looking, waiting to see some animal, wildlife or something, but there was nothing. It was dark, but I had my outside trailer light on, and there was some good moonlight. If there was something there, I should have been able to see it. Then I heard someone run off into the backfield. It had to be a very large, if not huge, heavy animal like a horse. It was bump, 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 bump. I was surprised it didn't shake the ground or trailer, but not a 4-legged horse like clippity-clop. It was an obvious 2-legged run, probably with a very long stride. And then it was gone. But I saw nothing, like it was invisible. I went back in and locked my door and nothing else happened. I looked around the next day for some footprints, but didn't find any. I can only think that it must have been a Bigfoot. Is it possible that it was cloaked or invisible? Okay, so a few years ago, maybe like 2 or 3, I was out walking out in the woods behind my grandmother's house. And I had a really bad feeling like I was being watched and heard something following behind me. Deer season was just about to start, so I thought nothing about it because I thought it might be a deer. Deer tend to hang out in the woods, so it wasn't much of a worry. I was about to head back through the trees and found a tree that I didn't feel particularly comfortable being near, as I had picked up bad vibes, but I was being stupid and I looked around the tree and it had like really big and strange claw marks in and on the bark of it. There was also some bones from what I'm guessing was a canine. When I had made it out of the woods, I had went inside the house. I don't really remember how I got there and my grandmother and why I had been bleeding. Note that I always carry a knife on me, so I went into the bathroom to patch it up. That was the end of that interaction. Something of the same sort had happened a few months later when I was visiting my aunt. I had also decided to explore the woods near her place, and I had caught a glimpse of a really tall figure covered in fur. I had taken out my photo to take a picture of it and zoomed in to get a better look at it, and noticed it was covered in leaves and a little bit of blood. It had very large antlers, so I went back to her house and researched about it. Both settings of the woods were both more so marshy, so I decided to just call the Wendigo Marsh. So now I have a Wendigo that lives out behind my grandparents' house. I had also wound up hearing a call and screaming when I was walking. My significant other and I used to manage a fly and fishing resort outpost in very far northwestern Ontario. We did this for a few years in the summers. We would live on an island from late April, early May until mid-October on a lake that had no road, rail access at all. There was also no phone service, no internet, no TV, no electric grid, no indoor plumbing, etc. This shit was as remote as it gets, and we'd live it for 7 months out of our year. Now typically the planes that get people in and out of there are little Cessnas and 50-year-old de Havilland beavers and otters, cubs/super cubs and the like. Very old, loud planes that you can hear coming miles away, fly low 5,000 feet typically, and don't fly past sundown. So this one night me and significant other are outside having before bed smoke and dog is out with us. We're alone this week on the lake as there's no guests on the lake at all, meaning there's no other humans for about 500 kilometers in any direction from us. It's about 12 a.m., pitch black, and suddenly we see this light come over the trees of our island. But something's off about it. It's not a shooting star or an airplane, that's apparent. It moves weirdly, changes direction, suddenly changes altitude. It's almost scanning for something. It's also completely silent. As we watch it, we both have this feeling of dread and fear. The dog also begins to freak out, barking and hair standing up on end. At this point, we run inside and turn every light in our cabin off. We then watch as it continues onward over the lake. As it goes, it stops in intervals and adjusts its altitude. Up scans forward a few hundred feet. Down scans forward, up scans forward. Down scans forward. It does this until it's over the next tree line and out of sight. It took us another hour to fall asleep. We've never been believers, so to speak, in extraterrestrial life or unearthly UFOs, but that pretty much converted us on the spot because it was so scary we were shaking afterward. I'm just glad someone was with me because every time I write this it sounds crazy, but it happened. Need help identifying? I think it was a werewolf. I'm from Brassel, and I've seen a lot of things in this short 21 years of my life, but one time I was doing a trail with a friend. We started very late, like 22 p.m., and finished around 1 a.m. near a residential area with an old church and cow pastures. My friend needed to deliver to a woman he knew some pots and pans that she had borrowed, so we could make food and sweets for the Feast of São João, a Catholic holiday. In the way back home, we needed to walk a long dirt road. which was separated from the pastures by a fence and trees back to back. Start to end of the road, we carried flashlights, but the night was very bright due to the reed being very wide and open. Midway through the long road, we started to hear some rumbling on the fence side behind the trees. I said that probably was a dog, and my friend believed. The sound became little by little closer the further we walked, and my friend stated that was a very big dog. We kept walking until the noise was right behind our necks. With that ominous presence, I took a piece of wood that we carried in case we were attacked by dogs and etc. on the trails, and asked my friend to shine the flashlight on the fence, and that was when I see it. A big skinny figure standing up in his two hind legs. His arms were so long they touched the ground like a gorilla, leaning back and hiding his true height, looking me in the eyes with his crooked spine. It looked like a terminal anorexic bull with a deformed face without horns, but with neck hair like a fake mane and moonlight gray skin and shine eyes. This 1 second looked like an eternity. Suddenly the light went out, and when I looked, my friend was running and shouting to me do the same. I ran like I never needed to run before, with that thing running beside me on the other side of the trees. When we reached the end of the road, we were graced by the statue of Our Lady Fatima standing still in his shrine, and the thing had vanished in the fields. I asked him if he had seen it, and he said no, and that he ran in fear. For so long I thought it was a werewolf, but it was so different from anything I have ever heard of. And I truly don't know that was, but still visits me in my dreams, lurking in the corners of my eyes. This was one of the freakiest experiences of my life. I was driving in the mountains with my friend. We were going back to our hotel, and it was late in the night. Pitch black for the most part, but we thought we would reach soon. We soon figured out that we were lost, and I had a bad feeling about something. My friend spurred me to go on because we were pretty tired and cold, but I stopped the car and got off to figure out where we were. I step out and just walk a bit around and notice that if I had just kept on driving for maybe 2 seconds longer, like my friend had told me to, we would have fallen to our deaths. The road ended not 5 meters from where I stood. My dad said he used to go work on a boat, fishing for whatever he could catch. And by boat, I mean a 20-foot boat would take a crew of around 8 people off to the middle of nowhere in a lake and drop them off on a very small, one-person boat, kind of like a canoe size, and the small boat would be anchored in place. But he would get dropped off around 9 at night, and they would pick them up around 3 in the morning. He said he did this for a month and actually enjoyed the loneliness out there. He would say that it would be pitch black some nights, and some nights the sky was beautifully lit with stars. One night it was pitch dark and kind of foggy, as he was just fishing as usual, when he could hear a strange noise behind him. It sounded like something trying to sneak up on him on the water. He turns around and the fog gets thicker and can barely see a hint of light. He tries to see what it is, and he said it looked like a humanoid figure walking on water towards my dad. By this time he is freaking out. He only has with him some food and water, a fishing rod with extra bait, and an empty tool. He said he stared at the humanoid object for the next few minutes as it walked towards him. When he first saw it, it was about 100 yards away. After a few minutes, it was around 35 feet away, and he could tell it was a person walking towards him. He is freaking out since he is in the middle of a lake, and there appears to be a person walking on water towards my dad. He reels in the fishing pole and gets ready to use it as a weapon. The humanoid figure has a lamp with him and is holding it to the front while walking towards my dad. As it gets near my dad, it speaks. It says my dad's name. My dad stays frozen as this figure is around 20 feet away from my dad. My dad asks who the figure is, and the man asks if he wants to go home. My dad then realizes it sounded like his friend, and as the person walks up to my dad, he can clearly see it is one of the persons that works with him. The man tells my father that the big boat broke down and that they are walking back to shore, and that he can just jump off the boat. They are but 2 feet deep of water. My dad laughs and jumps off the boat and into the water. leaves the boat there and decided to head back to the pickup zone. But he said that it was one of the scariest things that has ever happened to him. It was back in February 2007 in rural Indiana. I worked overnight shifts at a warehouse. We had been let off work a little early, and I was following a coworker down the road when I noticed he swerved off to the right side of the road, then swerved back onto the road and continued driving. I assumed maybe he wasn't paying attention or something ran out in front of him, but as I got closer, I saw a very tall, black shape walking in the middle of the roadway. I too had to swerve, but I essentially came to a full stop as the thing walked next to my driver's window. I never saw a head on it, and I didn't even see any arms. It looked like a large person wrapped up in a black blanket or cloak. The movements when I first saw it in the headlights were not like any sort of person or animal that I've recognized. I relate it to flapping in the wind like those inflatable wacky arm men you see in front of stores or car dealerships sometimes. It took a step and flailed its torso around, then another step and more flapping. Very unnatural movements. When it walked by the vehicle, it was considerably taller than my Explorer. It was leaning forward like a person who used a walker, but even leaning, it was still a foot or so taller. My Explorer was 67 according to Google, so this would have made it almost 7 tall while leaning forward. It had 2 very thick legs and a very thick torso, but I didn't see any hair, any clothing, nothing but solid black or dark brown. I couldn't make out any details other than that. When the red taillights lit it up as it was behind the vehicle, I could see between both legs, but the legs were solid, not translucent, as they blocked out the lights, so they had to have been solid. Anyways, I drove down the road and saw my coworker had pulled off into a gravel parking lot. I pulled up next to him, and he asked if I saw it and how it didn't have a head. I said I was going back to look for whatever it is because obviously it's something strange. We ended up heading back the way we came, and I was in front. As we got back to the same general area, I saw a large black dog lying in the middle of the road. Now, for a dog, it was a lot bigger than any normal dog I've seen, but it was just lying in the road and looked like it was dead. So the first thing I assumed was that's what was walking in the road. Maybe it got hit by a car and was flopping around. It looked like a large black German Shepherd type dog, but it had really thick, puffy fur like a chow dog. I got out to see what it was, and the dog raised its head up and looked back at me, growling with a low grumble. Its eyes reflected the headlights, so they looked like they were glowing yellowish. I stopped about 15 feet away from this dog, and it started trying to stand up, but it sort of hobbled a bit, then stood up directly on its hind legs and looked at me. It was standing up like a person, not how a normal dog would appear to be standing up, but how a person normally would. It had to have been around 6 foot tall. I'm 6'3", and it was almost my height, I would guess. It stood there for just a second or two, and then got down on all fours and ran off the road into the trees, but I never actually saw it using its front legs. It had ears on top of its head, a normal dog-looking face. It didn't have stereotypical hands like werewolves or other dogman depictions. It had all the features of just being a very tall black dog that could stand up on its hind legs. It wasn't a bear, I can tell the difference. Bears also don't have pointed dog ears. We also don't have bears in Indiana, supposedly, but we also don't have upright walking canines, so. The area it ran to is a deer preserve, and it has about an 8 or 9 foot fence that goes around the whole area. I don't know where it went, but it disappeared once it got out of the headlights. By this point, my coworker got out of his car, and I walked back toward him. We were both wondering what was going on. I happened to glance down, and standing between us was a normal-looking field mouse. It was also on its hind legs and using its front legs to clean itself. It looked all wet, and it hadn't been raining or snowing outside, so I wasn't sure how it was wet other than cleaning itself. I tried to nudge it with my shoe, but it didn't care. It just stayed there, wiping itself. We left, I got home, and looked up weird walking dogs. I drew a picture and posted it on a forum, and someone said I must have come across a Michigan dogman. I had never heard of that before. I knew about werewolves and stuff from movies, but I'd never heard of dogmen. I went back to work a few nights later and tried to tell my coworker about what I found, and the rest of the guys started laughing at me. So he got pissed off and basically threatened me to shut up about it, or he would just deny it happened. So I stopped talking about it and never really told anyone else for almost 15 years. I told my wife and a couple of close friends, but I don't even think they really believe it, and I struggle to believe it myself. Logical reasoning would say it was a hurt dog. It was playing with this mouse and got hit by a car, broke its front legs, and was hobbling around because it couldn't use them. That's why the mouse was wet and traumatized, because the dog was messing with it. I can explain everything else away, except that first thing walking in the road was so much bigger than the dog. I can accept everything else but that. This is why I started my podcast. I never felt like I could share my experience without people saying I'm insane. If someone told me it happened to them, I would also think the same thing. It's hard for someone who doesn't believe in this sort of stuff to have to question their own perception of reality. The book I wrote was heavily influenced by that night and my own life to an extent, because this is something that's haunted me for a while. Now some may think, oh, he wrote a book, so it's clearly false, and I wouldn't blame anyone for thinking that. I wrote my experience into a fictionalized book, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. It's my own way of continuing to deal with the situation, is how I feel. At the end of the day, I don't know what we saw. I don't necessarily believe in dogmen, but I also don't know what to believe just because I saw something unexplainable. It would be so much easier to dismiss it and say it's all fake, and I wish it was, honestly. A friend of mine and I have been experiencing strange things as of late the past week or so. My first potential encounter with this thing happened 7 years ago, but in the past week my friend and I have experienced some terrifying phenomena, climaxing at what he saw earlier today. The story is pretty long, so I'll hurry this up. It starts around 7 years ago. I was camping with my family in northern Michigan. The campsite was near a large lake, so we went swimming often. I looked across the lake and saw a large white figure moving on the other side. It was around 8 feet tall, had no fur, walked upright, and had no visible facial features. The moment I saw it, it ran into the woods. This was my first encounter. The story picks up around a week ago when my friend was in his house home alone with his dog. It was around 11 p.m. He was in his bedroom when he heard his mother's voice speaking to his recently deceased dog. His other living dog appeared to hear the voice as well. His mother was at work, so it could not have been her, and the dog to whom the voice was referring had died around 4 weeks beforehand. After this comes my second experience. I was reading in my room when my mother's voice called for me to come to the living room. The sound was accompanied by what sounded like someone walking in my living room. The only people home at the time were me and my brothers, who were asleep in their room. So I panicked and locked my door. Nothing happened for the rest of the night. The next day, my mother came into my room, asking me what I wanted. I was confused as I did not call her name. After I explained this, she appeared shocked, nearly certain that my voice had come from my bedroom. And finally, earlier today, my friend was walking his dog when he heard a rustling noise in a nearby sewer. Thinking that it was a raccoon, he walked over and looked into the drain. What was staring back up at him was a creature that he described as completely white, bald, thin, humanoid, and had no facial features, no eyes, anything. It looked around 9 feet tall, but it was hard to tell due to its crouched position. After a few seconds, the creature dashed away into the sewer at an incredibly high speed. My friend then immediately called me and explained the situation, which led us to write this post. We would like to know if we are in any danger from this creature, and if so, how to protect ourselves from it, as well as what this creature may be. This is what I saw back in 1998-1999. It happened in Ohio on a warm summer evening. I was sitting on my friend's deck, enjoying the peaceful night. Little did I know that I was about to witness something that would forever etch itself into my memory. It was a bit past midnight when it all unfolded. I remember gazing up at the sky, admiring the vast expanse of twinkling stars above. Suddenly, a blue streak tore across the heavens, resembling a meteor but much closer, as if it were only 30-50 feet above me. It happened so quickly, leaving me in awe of the spectacle. But that was just the beginning. Only moments after the blue streak disappeared, I noticed something strange in the distance. Two figures emerged, standing taller than any human I had ever encountered. They seemed to materialize out of thin air, right before my eyes. My heart raced as I watched them, captivated by their presence. The figure in front turned its head, as if acknowledging my presence on the deck. It locked eyes with me for a brief moment, and I could feel a sense of curiosity emanating from it. Then, without warning, they both started to fade away, gradually becoming transparent as they walked away. The encounter lasted no more than 20 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. There was no possible explanation for what I had just witnessed. It couldn't have been a trick of the light or any ordinary phenomenon. These beings were undeniably real, walking upright and emitting a radiant white glow. As I sat there, stunned by what I had seen, I knew deep down that sharing this experience would be met with skepticism and disbelief. The sheer absurdity of the encounter made it difficult for me to discuss it with others. So I kept it to myself, burying the memory deep within me. Over the years, I occasionally pondered the events of that fateful night. The blue streak, the enigmatic beings, and the inexplicable glow they emanated. I questioned their origin, their purpose, and whether there were others out there who had witnessed similar phenomena. But no matter how much time passed, the memory remained vivid and haunting. It became my secret, my personal encounter with the unexplained. And though I may never fully comprehend what I saw that night, I am forever changed by the undeniable reality of the extraordinary beings who crossed my path. To this day, I carry the weight of that encounter, knowing that sometimes the most extraordinary experiences are the ones we keep hidden, locked away in the depths of our hearts. Honestly, I don't know how much I believe in cryptids, but my mother once told me a story. It involves my great-great-grandmother and her neighbor, essentially her boyfriend. Later in life, after her husband passed away, the story was shared with my mother by this neighbor when he was still young. According to the neighbor, he and his friends were playing a game of hide and seek one day. It was a typical day in the 1910s. As he found a hiding spot, nestled away from his seeking friends, something strange caught his eye. From the corner of his hiding spot, he saw a sight that would forever be etched into his memory. A long, white creature emerged from a sewer drain, moving on all fours with an uncanny grace. Its form was unlike anything he had ever seen before. It seemed to possess a certain alien quality. Curiosity overwhelmed him as he watched the creature intently. It crawled with an eerie precision, almost as if it knew it was being observed. Without warning, it disappeared into another nearby sewer drain, leaving the young boy in a state of both awe and confusion. As my mother relayed this story to me, I couldn't help but be intrigued. The image of this mysterious creature crawling through the sewers lingered in my mind. What do you all think? And before you start, Mother would never lie to me. A camp instructor I once had was mountain biking or camping somewhere in Canada with a mate of hers. It was up in the mountains in a really remote place, so she's biking around, and they decide to set up camp in a clearing up on the trail. They see the clearing is perfectly round and the trees surround it so they can't see out. They're chilling, making noodles near the tent as the sun's setting, and they see around 10-15 people have surrounded them. The people are wearing dark robes and apparently something similar to HP Death Eater masks. The masked people start stepping in unison and get closer and closer to them. They start freaking the F out and screaming at them to stop, then get on their bikes and kick some of the people away and ride down the mountain as fast as they can. They come across a cabin and start banging on the door, and a dude, a hunter of some sort, comes out. They explain the situation, and he radios his buddies to go check it out with him. Turns out that place is a high-action cult area, and there has been missing persons and people taken by cults. Oh, and when the hunter got there, all the tent and stuff was taken. I had always known that being a Navy SEAL or part of Special Forces would mean facing the unimaginable, but nothing could have prepared me for the chaos that unfolded in the heart of Mogadishu, Somalia. Our mission was clear: rescue American hostages and thwart the resurgent warlords' plans. As part of the new generation of SEALs, I was ready to prove myself in the crucible of urban warfare. Our descent into the tumultuous streets of Mogadishu was swift and silent. We moved like shadows, our training ingrained in every step we took. The city was a labyrinth of danger, where every corner held the potential for ambush. We could feel the weight of history bearing down on us, for we knew that this city had once been the setting for the infamous Black Hawk Down mission. As we reached the hostage location, our intel proved accurate. We secured the Americans, their eyes filled with gratitude and relief. We were about to make our way back to the extraction point when the warlord's men descended upon us like a swarm of angry wasps. Urban combat was a nightmare. The narrow streets echoed with gunfire and the cacophony of battle. We fought relentlessly, trading fire with the enemy, each step forward costing us precious time and blood. In the midst of this chaos, our team was separated, and I found myself with only 3 other SEALs. We fought our way to the outskirts of town, battered and exhausted. The sun was setting, casting eerie shadows across the desolate landscape. That's when we saw a creature unlike anything we had ever encountered. It was probably about 8 feet tall, kind of dark gray with a little brown. It had a mane kind of like a male lion, but with shorter hair around the body and legs. The most unsettling part was that it was walking upright on its back legs, like a twisted fusion of man and beast. As we cautiously approached our vehicle, the creature dropped to all fours and bolted away at an incredible speed. Confusion gripped our team as we exchanged bewildered glances. We couldn't have been prepared for what happened next. The creature attacked with a sudden ferocity, launching itself at us. Gunfire erupted as we opened fire, but the bullets seemed to do little more than anger the beast. 2 of our men fell, torn apart by the creature's savage assault. Panic gripped us as we continued to fire, desperate to save our lives. It was a harrowing battle that felt like a nightmare, but eventually our combined firepower took its toll. The creature fell lifeless to the ground, an enigma wrapped in death. With our fallen comrades in our hearts and the unsettling memory of the unknown predator etched into our minds, we made a hasty retreat from that desolate place. The extraction point was our lifeline, and we raced towards it with every ounce of strength we had left. We left Mogadishu behind, a city steeped in darkness and mystery, its streets haunted by the specter of warlords and the unknown. Back in the safety of our base, we debriefed, trying to make sense of what we had encountered. None of us had answers. It was as if we had stumbled upon a creature from the depths of myth and legend. As I look back on that fateful mission, I'm left with more questions than answers. What was the creature that had attacked us on the outskirts of Mogadishu? Where had it come from, and was it a harbinger of something even more ominous? In the world of Navy SEALs, we were trained to face the worst humanity had to offer, but the encounter with the unknown had left an indelible mark on us. We were meant to be the hunters, but in that moment, we had become the hunted, lost in a darkness that defied explanation. As I carry the memory of that mission with me, I am haunted by the knowledge that there are mysteries in this world that may never be unraveled, and that sometimes the shadows of the unknown are the most terrifying adversaries of all. I don't like to talk about this incident or even have any thoughts about it, because I really feel like whatever I saw could still possibly be watching me, or following me in some way, but I feel like in this community I could get some answers. On July 7th of last year, my boyfriend and I decided to go to a lake called Boiling Springs located in central Pennsylvania to do a late-night photo shoot because he wanted to do something special for me on my birthday. We got to the lake around 11:30 p.m., and surprisingly, when we got there, we both were calm, happy, and ready to take some pictures. I felt zero negative feelings or any type of negative presence in the air. We took some at the pool house, and then we eventually made it to the lake area. We decided to lay down a blanket by a very old sycamore tree and watch the stars. Still, no feeling of negative presence, and my body was on zero alert of having to fight or flight. To the left of us, and more so behind us, there was a gathering of brush and trees where it was completely dark and you couldn't see in. We were casually laughing and talking until all of a sudden we heard what we thought were dogs, then coyotes, and then they started to whimper as if they were being attacked or in pain. I said, "What is that?" I then started to be more alert. "Probably just a neighbor's dog," he said. Probably about 5 minutes after the whimpering stopped, I heard something heavy being dragged through the brush towards us. I got up on my knees with my heart beating out of my chest. I said, "Get up." My boyfriend just kept sitting there, still not very fazed. About 10 seconds later, I looked through the brush more, and about only 8 feet away from me knelt a glowing white, bone-thin being on all fours digging in the dirt below it. Now, I don't have the best vision, so about 3 different theories went through my head at once. Deer? Wolf? Person? Then my stomach dropped and tears welled in my eyes, and my gut told me that whatever it was not any of these. My body and mind told me that this was not something that I've seen before or have ever encountered, or even of this earth or dimension. I don't even remember getting up from the blanket, but my body jolted up and I started crying, "What is that?" I have never felt that level of fear. And the weirdest part, no response. Just kept digging and digging with its white front limbs. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. I thought I was going to pass out. I ran over behind the sycamore tree close to us, yet my boyfriend stayed sitting on the blanket, but I could tell he was terrified too. "What are you?" he yelled. When he said what and not who, I knew that what we were looking at was no human and not even an animal. It stopped digging, didn't look over at us, but talked in a language neither of us have ever heard. It sounded ancient, like no one had spoken that dialect for centuries. My boyfriend asked, "What?" No response. He then asked, "Are you a trail hiker?" Slight pause, then it said in a deep, bone-chilling voice, "Yes." Nothing after. He then nervously said, "Oh ha, are you traveling north or south?" South. Still no more exchange of words until my boyfriend finally knew this wasn't right and stood up fast and said, "Well, sorry, my girlfriend and I were in your space. We're leaving now." At this point, I had tears streaming down my face. My heart was vibrating my entire body, and I could barely even move normally because of how much fear had taken over my body. Somehow, we still managed to gather our things and run back to our car. We didn't say a word to each other until we got to the car. I honestly don't even remember the drive home, but I do remember I couldn't stop laughing from disbelief. It was almost like I disassociated on the ride home. The next day was my birthday, and I was home alone in the morning. It was a sunny day, no clouds in the sky, but still I was alone and I felt like I was being watched. I went out and did errands before my birthday celebration and went to my salon just to be in public and around people. An old coworker of mine was someone I confided in about it, and she actually grew up in Boiling Springs, Pennsylvania. She told me that she remembers there were random reports of cattle being mutilated and even UFO sightings as well. She told me to never go back there at night. "Check the pictures you took that night," I've been told many times. I've checked, and there's nothing odd about any of them and no sighting of the creature. This was a life-changing event for me. It's something that will never leave my mind. The core feeling I felt when I saw it digging in the ground just a few feet away from me, I'll never forget. I think the most sickening aspect about this whole situation is that it was the eve of my birthday. That's just too personal and too ironic, since we used to go there for months before that incident at night. Please everyone comment your thoughts. I would love to hear feedback from people who have had encounters as well. Other incidents have happened since then, nothing that raw or unsettling, but more evidence that I have been marked. Everyone be safe, and thank you for giving your time to read about my encounter. I grew up on a farm way down south. I'm not going to give any exact locations. It was weird then, and it's probably weird now. And if I tell the entire internet where it's located, it's likely not going to get better. In the 80s, our community was extremely isolated. It was one small town surrounded closely by a few small family-owned farms, including mine. No distinguishing features for miles around, other than the forest near town. That forest was thick, it was old, it was big, and most of the locals swore it was haunted. Maybe some of you guys reading this will understand what I mean when I try to emphasize the complete isolation you experience, growing up in a place like that. It's not quite as bad now, but when I was growing up, you could drive for literally hours without ever seeing another sign of human life. Most of you who are reading this are never going to know how this feels. You're completely, totally isolated. If you scream at the top of your lungs, nobody will hear you. Nobody will come running. Nobody will call the police. You are alone. This is going to be important later. Now, back then, on the rare occasion that I had an evening off where I had no chores to do and no schoolwork, I generally had to make my own fun. When I was young, I stuck to playing on the farm with whatever toys I could find. Due to how isolated our community was, the most advanced piece of equipment we had was a tractor, so no television or anything of that sort. As I grew older, I eventually, perhaps naturally, grew inclined to want to explore the forest a little, but every time I would approach my dad about it, he would sternly put me off the idea. If I'm remembering right, he used to tell me stories about bogeymen who lived in the trees and ate children who entered the forest at night. They worked on a 12-year-old, but by the time I was 17, I was more curious than anything, and one night, after I was completely sure that my parents were asleep, I snuck out of the house and off the farm and went to the woods. It was pitch black out by that point, of course, so I brought along the only flashlight we had, which was more like a lantern casing with a bulb inside of it and only gave modest illumination. I walked around for maybe half an hour, trying to find something worth investigating. There were no trails leading into it, nothing of that sort. Or so I thought. After around 20 minutes of searching, I came across what looked like a footpath leading into the woods. Of course, this surprised me and drew my interest, because as far as I knew, the woods were totally untamed. I'm sure most of you think I'm an idiot by this point, and I agree with you heartily, but I was 17. I was a dumb kid, and the thought that there were people and things out there who could and would hurt or kill me given half the chance just hadn't fully registered with me. I went into the woods. The path was fairly long, and as I went, I started noticing this smell. There aren't many scents as vile as rotten flesh, and it's 10 times worse when you're as far down south as I was, where the heat starts to bake it until it's stuck to the ground. Whatever I was smelling, though, it was something like that, but kicked up on adrenaline. If I hadn't been a dumbass at the time, that would have been enough to make me turn back, but I was more curious than ever to find out what was making that smell. I kept going. I was totally fixated on the path ahead of me, and it didn't help that the lantern wasn't giving very good light. When I finally reached the end, the smell was so strong I was near ready to puke. The path led right into a clearing, maybe about as wide and tall across as a medium-sized house, smack dab in the middle of the forest. I don't remember the details very well, because this was years ago and I got the F out of there pretty fast, but a few details stuck with me. First, there was a slab of stone sitting in the middle of the clearing. It looked like somebody had broken it off of a boulder with a pickaxe or something and dragged it through the trees to get it there, and it had some kind of dark rubbery coating over it. Second, there was a big pile of dirt in the clearing and a hole next to it. Somebody had been digging, and the smell was coming from the hole. Third, further back in the clearing, somebody had built a hut, a really shitty one. It looked like it was barely standing, didn't have any windows. As I got close to it, I realized that the smell was also coming from inside of the hut, even more strongly than from inside of the hole, and the door was hanging open. I stood there for a few seconds. By that point, even I was smart enough to be worried that I had stumbled onto something I shouldn't have, but I decided to look inside of the hut. The closer I got, the harder it was to tolerate that smell, and when I pushed the door open further, a wave of it rolled out onto me and the air in there was oven hot. The sun was baking it. Finally, I was able to see what was inside of the hut. Dead livestock. Goats. Chickens. At least one cow. I could see other shapes I didn't recognize, or that weren't quite illuminated enough for me to make them out. They were piled up in the hut, thrown in carelessly like so many sacks of potatoes. The light was reflecting off of the goat's eyes, staring back at me. Most of them had huge gashes across the throat, like they'd been bled to death, and they were rotting in the heat. This was where the smell was coming from. I don't remember what happened next that well. I do remember that seeing that was finally enough to make my dumbass realize that it was time to get the F out of that forest. I turned and I ran for it, as fast as my legs could carry me, holding the lantern up high so I didn't trip. I don't know what it was, why I felt that way, but my instincts were screaming bloody murder, and I knew on a gut level that if I fell, I was going to die. It might have just been my imagination, but I swear I heard footsteps following me from the clearing, more than one set. I don't remember anything else specific from the time I decided to cut and run to the time I got out of the woods. All I remember is that I was just about having a heart attack of sheer terror and absolutely certain that somebody or something was chasing me. I turned the lantern off as I ran and made straight for town, and when I got close enough to be familiar with the terrain, I hid behind a rock and waited. But nobody came. Nobody was following me. I went back home, still scared as shit, and woke my dad to tell him what I had found. I still remember the look on his face when I finished, just as well as I remember what he told me next, taking me by the shoulders, as dead serious as I'd ever seen him. He told me not to tell a single person, not even my closest friend, not even my mother, what I'd seen in that forest. He made me promise, and when he was finally satisfied that I understood him, he paddled my ass so hard I had trouble sitting for a few days after and sent me back to bed. True to my word, I never told anybody else what I'd seen. Things were weird in town for a few days after, though I do remember that much. Everybody was tense with one another, way more than they usually were, like something was about to happen. Nothing did though, and after a few weeks had passed, things were back to normal. Until today, I've never told a single soul besides my dad what happened that night, and he passed away back in 2009. I don't know what would have happened to me if I'd tripped. I don't know what they were doing in that clearing, who was doing it, or why, but I do know this. There was something going on in that forest, something bad, and it wasn't the work of a bogeyman. My girlfriend and I were camping in the backyard in the west end of Council Bluffs, Iowa. The date was July 7, 1974. I noticed an object high in the sky traveling from horizon to horizon like a satellite, except it was red and traveling somewhat faster and moving side to side in a wave motion. Not a fixed pattern, but not exactly random either. It went much slower than a meteor. We stood up from our cots to better watch the skies. A short time later, we saw a disc-shaped object with red lights on its perimeter from a distance of about 2 miles. It seemed to be moving above the trees near the Missouri River or following the river itself. It was not quite hovering, but moving slowly while tipping on its sides and demonstrating to us that this was something very unusual. We watched it head south until we lost it below the trees. We stayed alert and debated if we should go to Lewis and Clark Monument, a park on the bluffs overlooking Council Bluffs in Omaha. About 5 or 10 minutes after last seeing the object, it flew almost directly over our heads, about a block away, now going north and still just above treetop level. We lost sight of it and decided to go ahead and drive to the park. On the way, we were driving through Big Lake Park and I was keeping watch. I saw the object coming in our direction, still at treetop level, except I had the eerie feeling that it was coming for us. We panicked. I wanted to hide under the train bridge near the tennis court, and my girlfriend stopped the car about 50 yards short of the bridge. We ran to and under the bridge to hide. I've never experienced that kind of fear before or since, but like a couple of prairie dogs, we felt compelled to peek out and see more of this incredible object. So we did. It was hovering above a large cottonwood tree near the tennis court about 50 to 75 yards away from us. It was still dark out. The disc looked about 100 feet in diameter, with large red rectangular lights flashing in sequence around its edge, which seemed to be about 15 feet thick. As we watched, frozen with awe and fear, it dipped its edge while hovering. One of the red lights went out, and in its place a beam of light shot out of it and shined directly at us. The next thing either of us remember is that it was now daylight, and we were back in the car driving towards our original destination of Lewis and Clark Monument. We called police, and they said they had a report of something in Missouri Valley, Iowa, about 20 miles to the north. Animals were behaving strangely. Either they were oddly quiet or behaving wildly. When we drove back through Big Lake Park, there were people there who said they saw nothing. I don't really know how much time we are talking about here. In 1974, I had never heard of the phenomenon of missing time, but over the years I became well schooled with the term. We make no claims of abduction. Dr. Kasher of the University of Nebraska at Omaha, after hearing my story, referred me to a hypnotist. I never went, maybe out of fear. I was afraid to know any more. To this day, I feel I know enough. My girlfriend and I went home that morning and drew identical pictures and repeated identical stories. You have to understand, at the time I thought the world was coming to an end or something. In 1977, an article came out in Popular Mechanics about an incident that happened very near there involving a blob of molten metal falling 500 feet from an object similar in description to what we saw. Jackie's Valley came to investigate that occurrence. That is why I repeat my story and will always harbor these hazy memories and questions. I've never seen or experienced anything like that since, but I feel it in my gut every day. When I was in the Marine Corps, we had an exercise out in Arizona retrieving airdrop supplies. It was a way for the C-130 pilots to practice. I drove the lead Humvee and manned the radio. The only other vehicle was a truck with a boom to recover the pallets. We'd drive probably 45 minutes outside of Yuma down the interstate to Dateland, then drive another 20-30 minutes down a dirt road to the middle of nowhere in the desert. We'd then wait a few hours for the C-130s to show up. They'd make probably 10-15 passes, then finally would drop the supplies. This all took several hours, so it wasn't unusual that we'd end up retrieving the pallets in the dark, then driving back in total darkness in the middle of nowhere with no lights but our headlights for miles. Our last day doing this, we had finally loaded up the pallets, and it was already dark as hell. If you're not aware, the headlights in military vehicles are pretty much electric candles, so you can't see shit. Well, as we were driving back to Dateland, just kind of zoned out as our teeth rattled out of our head. Humvees don't ride very good on rutted roads. I suddenly catch a glimpse of several silhouettes of human bodies in my peripheral vision at the side of the road. They were gone just as fast as they had appeared, so it startled the shit out of me. I didn't know what was going on, but I kept driving anyways. Not 5 minutes later, I see silhouettes of people scattering in both directions just beyond the light of my headlights directly in front of me. I stop and don't see anything, so I keep going. What could this be?
Thanks for listening. Hope you already fallen asleep. See you tomorrow at the same time.